and this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. Our guest tonight, starting at 6, we have somebody who is going to talk about, a Canadian gentleman who's going to talk to us about the XL pipeline and Canadian oil and what's going on up in Canada about this. And at 7 o'clock, we're going to go over the budget that the president has dropped on us, and somebody from the National Priorities Project is going to talk about the budget to explain what's in it, what's good, what's bad, what's useful, what's not. But our first guest tonight is somebody who's written a new book called Love 2.0, How Our Supreme Emotion Affects Everything We Feel, Think, Do, and Become. And this is Barbara Fredrickson, PhD, and she is with us. Hello.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So when I see Love 2.0, in the modern world, when you see something that is 2.0 or 7.0, whatever it is, it's supposed to be new and improved or a brand new whole operating system. Is that what this is intended to be?
What I'm trying to do here is get people to rethink their commonly held views of love, and I think it's an upgrade that's really practical in terms of, with this new perspective on love, we kind of unlock our capacity for it, and it can make us healthier and help us grow.
A new perspective, I guess, very much due to science, and I'm reminded here that I neglected to give people your background, so I'll do that now. Barbara Fredrickson is it Kenan? Keenan, Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Director of the Positive Emotions and Psychophysiology Laboratory at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's a leading scholar in her field, the author of Positivity, and has twice been invited to present her findings to the Dalai Lama. So, in fact, a new way of looking at love, a new way of understanding it based on science or neurobiology?
Right, and my, one of the challenges of writing about love from a scientific perspective is that, everybody's got their pre-existing views of love kind of, hard-earned through personal experience or, soaked in from the culture that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to do here is, looking from an evolutionary psychology perspective, really give voice to how the body might define love, how your brain might define love, and so not necessarily to replace our cultural views and personal views of love, but to augment it, to add to it.
Well, but it seems to me as I read the book, you are trying to be a little bit revolutionary, which is to say I thought actually to replace some of these old sentimental ideas. For instance, the main one being, or one of the main ones being, since you talk about permanence and impermanence from a Buddhist perspective, the idea that love is eternal. Once you're in love, it's love forever, all the songs, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, so a couple of the things that I say from the way your body appreciates the emotion love is as transient and, short-lived, non-exclusive. And what I'm arguing is that it's a micro moment of what I call shared positivity resonance. Mm-hmm. So it says when two people share a positive emotion, their biobehavioral synchrony unfolds across the two. It's such that, it's like one emotional state occurring across two brains and bodies at once, and also a sense of mutual care.
That could happen in a moment, even with a total stranger, right?
Right. So, the properties of it are similar, whether it occurs with you and your soulmate or you and a stranger. Now, the frequency of it differs in those different connections, and also potentially the intensity. But in terms of just the basic way that our minds and our biochemistries and our emotions shift to become in line with another person's.
To the extent that we're all sort of culturally soaked, like in a car wash of love, and you have to sort of dry off and relearn it. I'm thinking of a song here. When I fall in love, it will be forever.
Right. Yeah.
You know that song, right?
Yeah, we have all these romantic notions about that. And actually, what I'm trying to do with this is take two areas of psychology, relationship science and emotion science, and pull the best out of each. And from relationship science, I pull out that, we elevate certain relationships as more important than others. Love relationships, those are considered to be more important and valuable to to our health and survival than non-love relationships. But I think relationship science has it wrong by saying that, it's like a toggle switch. You flip on love and it stays that way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what I'm arguing is that these micro moments of positivity resonance are like little nutritious bursts.
You say love is a nutrient in the book,
yeah,
right?
It's a nutrient that helps us and the other person become healthier.
So maybe you should define positivity resonance, because it has a little new agey kind of a sound.
That's true. That's true. I mean, what I'm trying to do is I've been studying positive emotions for 25 years, and mostly looking at them from the perspective of one person, how it affects one person's brain and one person's health, one person's trajectory of growth. And so here, the data have convinced me that have emerged in my lab and other people's labs that the positive emotions that we share with others that are really reverberating across two brains and bodies at once and kind of amplifying for a few moments until we disengage with that person, those might be especially nutritious, especially important for our health and well-being.
When you say things are reverberating or resonating between two bodies and two brains, you're not being poetic, right?
No. I'm suggesting that there's there's evidence that there's a mirroring of our neural firings, a mirroring of our biochemical responses, and one thing that we can see, there's a mirroring of gestures, the tempo of our gestures. We can see that as two people click, they start to, kind of get in this nonverbal dance that we can witness. But what the research now shows us is that that's just what we can see with our eyes. There's also oxytocin synchrony and neural firing synchrony. And in a way, what that allows is for the jargon phrase for it is an intersubjectivity to emerge, where two people are thinking and feeling the same thing. So it literally means they're sharing the same emotion, and their brain patterns are looking far more similar than they were, 2 minutes ago when they weren't engaged.
So in a situation like this, it's almost as if the final sum could be much greater than the individual. In other words, it builds on itself and becomes something in between two people, which includes them, which is larger than the two of them, right?
Exactly, because like if I smile and then you smile and then I smile at your smile, and it just keeps kind of bouncing back and forth like that. But it's not just with the nonverbals; it's also happening sort of at a that's why I think of it like a wave rolling through two brains and bodies at once, and then back and forth. And so it's very true that all of the positive emotions that we experience individually have profound effects on the way that our brains work and set us on trajectories of growth. So individually experienced positive emotions are super important, but the ones that get amplified, back to us and mirrored back to us and kind of, create this electric charge for a few micro moments, those seem to be especially potent. That's what the data tell us.
So, for instance, if you're listening to music by yourself, or you're reading a book by yourself, or you're walking in a nature path and see a beautiful bird or a leaf by yourself, and you have a certain kind of almost ecstasy, it's not exactly the same thing as if you share something with another person.
Right, because it doesn't get amplified in the same way, like it doesn't get mirrored back to you in someone else's reaction, in a way that each person's smile or laughter, say, both is an expression of their own emotion and simultaneously pulls out a positive emotion from another person. And so you can see how that can reverberate back and forth. And so it's like there's it gets in an upward spiral loop between two people.
Obviously, if this is practiced by people, and in the second part of your book, you talk about loving kindness meditation. I mean, if a culture practiced this, it would have very positive effects on the entire culture, not just a love relationship between two people. Here's a question I want to ask you, though. If this kind of thing works so well as a nutrient to build this up, would it work in reverse? Like if two people who hated each other were interacting, what would happen then?
Right. Well, negative emotions can resonate a bit, but they don't create the same kind of, bond between two people as positive emotions would. And the difference there is that positive emotions expand our awareness and kind of melt the boundaries between us and our environment or us and another person. And so we can start to appreciate a self-transcendence or a oneness, whereas negative emotions are really survival emotions, so that you get really guarded and you kind of, the boundaries of the self, put your armor on. And so you might have some daggers that you throw out at each other kind of in synchrony in an argument, but you're not kind of in the same way acting as one, but reacting, back and forth.
It seems to me, and unfortunately it seems to me in my own life, as I look back on it, that sometimes you could be locked in with somebody or carry somebody around in your heart almost, or somewhere, that you hate as much as somebody that you love. Is this not the case often with people? That they are as, locked in, glued together with even people who, they could even die and still you carry them around with you in a way that feels angry, or you hate them. I mean, you're locked in that way almost as long as hate can last as long as love, it seems to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely, there's a finding in psychology that's really, widely supported, and that is it's called negativity bias. It's basically that negative emotions scream at us and positive emotions just whisper. I mean, they're just, the negative things in life grab our attention so much more. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons for that, though, is that negative events and experiences and people are relatively rare compared to the positive side. And that's, in a way, why they need to scream out at us so we don't, by chance, miss them in their rarity.
Really? So love is much more around us than hate is?
Yes. So in addition to, bad being stronger than good, that's the negativity bias, there's an other important asymmetry that's been shown time and time again, is that most moments are positive. The things that, when our mind grabs onto negative stuff, it's often something that we get through mental time travel by, ruminating about the past or anxiously worrying about the future. Mm-hmm. But if we really take a slice of the present moment, the way I like to say it is, in this moment, who's putting pins in your eyes? Mm-hmm. Usually, in the present moment, we're comfortable. We're in most situations have most of our needs met, might be, have the opportunity to, if we pay attention to what's in the present moment, we might see natural beauty, human kindness.
And what you say in the book, like if we go to the sink and turn on the water, it'll usually come out and we can have a drink, right? So,
yeah.
So, I mean, generally, if you're not really in a lot of...
Exactly.
Right. So, three things that you distinguish in the book: brain chemistry or brain structure, and then I'm pronouncing this right? Oxytocin. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the vagal tone. Maybe you could explain those 1, 2, 3.
Right. Well, the neural synchrony work that I'm describing has some very interesting new advances in brain imaging that show that basically speaking and listening, if we're actually really paying attention well, our brains of the listener and the speaker are pretty much doing the same thing, following the same kind of ups and downs. There's a kind of a whole brain neural mirroring in a way.
And that can be measured, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this isn't an isolated mere neuron kind of phenomenon, but it's really sort of a whole brain patterning, which is really phenomenal. And the researcher who has worked on this is at Princeton University, and he describes this neural coupling as that communication is a single act performed by two brains. And from that, I've noticed too, connected that work with work on oxytocin synchrony, that when parents and infants interact and show this sort of positive engagement dance where they're really, their behaviors are really coordinated and there's mutual enjoyment. And those same moments, there's also oxytocin synchrony. And oxytocin is a neuropeptide that's been associated with bonding and connecting.
But literally, what does that mean, a neuropeptide? What is that?
It's, it used to be considered to be a hormone, but they found that it works, it's active in the brain and all over the body. So it's much more of a involved in the central nervous system than previously thought.
So it could affect muscles, organs.
Yes,
Okay.
all it's active throughout the body. It used to be that people thought that oxytocin was involved in childbirth, mating, and lactation.
Mm-hmm.
So those are really potent moments of bonding, and they saw it as something that facilitates bonds in those really kind of once in a lifetime or just a few times in a lifetime events.
Mm-hmm.
But now the research is showing that very subtle experiences like getting to know somebody or getting to know a new neighbor or sharing a few giggles with your child also lead to increases in oxytocin, not at the same level,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of little bursts.
Is there any relationship between oxytocin and oxycodone?
Not that I know of.
Why do they have is it just oxy as some generic...
Oh, I bet it has something to do with the biochemistry of it, but that's
because people take that stuff and they have a certain kind of I love the whole world ecstasy feeling.
Oh, well, maybe that's it. Yeah.
I don't know. And the vagal tone is what?
Vagal tone refers to the kind of health of the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the sympathetic nervous system is sort of the fight or flight response,
mm-hmm.
and the parasympathetic nervous system is what calms you down after a fright. And it's measured as it can be measured in terms of heart rate variability, and that is a very subtle arrhythmia in your heart rate, a healthy arrhythmia,
mm-hmm.
which is reflected by your heart rate slowing down a little bit while you're exhaling and speeding up a little bit while you're inhaling. And people vary on how much of that arrhythmia they show, and people who have a little bit more of it are considered to have higher vagal tone than others. And high vagal tone, like high muscle tone, is a good thing. And
could you actually almost call this a talent for loving?
Yeah, actually. What's interesting about it is that, it had largely been viewed as a very stable trait, like your adulthood height, that it doesn't really change that much.
Uh-huh.
And yet it had been related to a couple different things, psychological traits like controlling your attention and emotions and having better social skill, perhaps for those reasons, because you're better able to control your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And physically, it's been linked to better cardiovascular health, better glucose regulation, better immune regulation. So it's linked to both social skill and health.
But you're not doomed if you have a higher or lower level. You're saying this new science says that you can change that, right?
Exactly. And actually, this is the research from my own lab that shows that not only does vagal tone predict who might have more of these micro moments of positivity resonance, or what I'm calling love,
mm-hmm.
But the more micro moments of love that you experience, the higher your vagal tone becomes. So it's like a positive feedback loop, a literal positive feedback loop that amplifies in what I call an upward spiral.
So, in other words, it's like exercise. You just deliberately could expose yourself to these kinds of, or channel yourself into these kinds of moments, and it would build back on you, right?
Exactly. And this is why it suggests that this could be one reason why that people who have closer social relationships and closer social connections are healthier and live longer. That's something we've known for decades, but we've never really been able to understand what is it about, having close social ties that gets under the skin and makes us physically healthier.
So even if you started out with a terrible situation where, and part of what you say in your book is that people, obviously this is the the opposite, right? That if people who are very lonely, and apparently there are more lonely people in the country than there have ever been before, for various reasons. Right. But if you grow up abandoned or lonely or spend a lot of time alone, you usually wind up in adulthood with more of these kinds of illnesses, right?
Right, exactly. Chronic illnesses,
immune,
you're at greater risk for them for sure.
And that's because you just don't have these positive, even physical, finally, flows in your body, right?
Right, and this is where I think, the evidence is suggesting that these emotional moments, these micro moments of connection, really do act as nutrients that help us become healthier versions of ourselves.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to Barbara Fredrickson, PhD, and the book is new book called Love 2.0, How Our Supreme Emotion, that's love, affects everything we feel, think, do, and become. What is love at first sight? How does that fit into all this?
Well,
is that real, by the way, love at first sight?
I think it can be, definitely. If people are experiencing maybe a really intense micro moment of connection, and in a way, also eye contact is something that's been found to be particularly consequential for letting these moments amplify. So, like when you play with an infant, it's often, with peekaboo and making eye contact. Mm-hmm. It can also be with touch. But connection is a real key piece of this, too.
Well, babies look at you, having had a couple myself.
Right, and
they look at you. They look at you, just stare at you with their eyes wide open to find out what the deal is, right?
Exactly, and babies are, they arrive on the scene with, some great tricks for hooking adults.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So,
you've got two kids, right?
Yes, I do.
So you've got that experience in both directions.
Right.
So smiling, but then it's an important thing in your book is it's just that you have to be there, right? I mean, in other words, to really have this interchange, to this interconnection that builds and it's positivity resonance, smiling, touching,
right,
that kind of thing. In other words, you have to be there to do it.
Right. One of the things that we like to believe about love is that it's unconditional, and I argue that, well, at one level, it's really not, because these kind of micro moments of connection don't emerge no matter what, regardless of conditions. One, we have to feel safe, and that's probably one of the biggest barriers for people to have these shared micro moments, is that they don't feel safe around other people. People who are depressed, anxious, or lonely often feel that social interaction is unsafe. Mm-hmm. And the second is that we need to be connected in some way. And how I describe it is real-time sensory information. So that could be shared voice, eye contact, touch, similar body movements and kind of, dancing together, that sort of thing.
But shared voice with two people physically present, or shared voice like on a phone conversation?
It could be on a phone conversation, because when, in a conversation, I mean, you make your living with your voice.
Right.
So much information is carried by the vocal tract because our emotional engagement level changes the shape of the voice box and the vocal channel, and that is something that we can pick up on and connect over.
Well, I was thinking of I read all different kinds of books, and one book some publisher sent me this is the title of it, The Charisma of Hitler. Which is true. I'm not actually going to interview this guy because I don't feel like doing that. But part of the book he's explaining is that people have a certain influence over other people, and often it's the use of their voice that does it.
Right. Well, and, research shows that leaders' emotions are far more contagious than anyone else's, in part because they have the floor, and they...
But even if they didn't, somebody emerges as a leader sometimes because they have maybe a certain way of influencing people. And you take a guy like Bill Clinton,
right,
had that kind of,
Yeah, I mean, as the science of psychology really doesn't tackle charisma very deeply, but I think this, micro moments of connection may be sort of at the base of what we call charisma.
But in the book also, obviously there's a kind of love that you would call altruism. Do people love other people for themselves, or do people love other people to be loved?
That's a great question. Well, in this definition, you don't really have to choose. It kind of goes, both ways at the same time. So it's you feel good yourself, and there's a mutual care about it. When this is by definition, love is kind of going both ways.
Mm-hmm. So an important part of the book is, to move along here, you obviously have studied and practiced meditation, Buddhism. That kind of thing. So you don't just talk about this, you present your findings, and then you give at great length ways in which people can practice this to improve how they're able to love, how they're able to receive love, and how that could improve their entire lives. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
The first half of the book is all, kind of a digestible tour through the science. The second half is all, okay, if this is really true, what would I do to change the way I'm interacting with people on a daily basis? And I provide a range of guided meditations, and in part because my research has focused so much on the effects of meditation over the last 7 years or so, and people are always asking me, where do I start? I created a website to go with the book that offers some free guided meditations that are really tailored to the science.
Is this something that you speak, or is it a video, or?
It's an audio file, guided audio meditations. And they're at www.positivityresonance.com.
Okay.
And then also, but in addition to the meditations, some people are just going to know, well, meditation's not for me. And so I have a number of other what I call micro-moment practices that are really just shifts in awareness to be more other-focused, kind of break out of our cocoon of self-absorption, which we're typically in, and just connect with others over, wishing them well, and just having a sincere interest in other people just for their own sake.
All of this is a good thing. Obviously, it's good is putting it mildly. It's something essential that we all have to do. But then, of course, the world, history, culture intrudes, which can be noisy, diverting, disputatious.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you've got to try to prevail through all these things, right?
Right. I feel like, life's going to give us all kinds of things to feel negative emotions about. But if we want to have a better handle on our own happiness and health, then we need to all develop some self-regulation skills where we kind of bend our emotions towards ones that will make us healthier.
You think you could go down to Washington and maybe help out a little bit?
Well, I'm trying to do that as often as I can.
So, what about, last question, what about solitude and all this? Don't people need solitude? Oh,
definitely. These micro moments of connection are not something that you're going to want all day long, every day. People need their moments of connection, and they need their moments of privacy, and everyone's different on that. The way I like to put it is that no emotion is meant to last forever, not even the ones that feel so good. These are micro moments of connection, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be connected and of a piece with people at all the time.
Well, that's clearly where the awareness, which is easy to say rather than to do, the awareness of impermanence comes in. Because if you're attached, and using the Buddhist term in the way the Buddhists would use it, in terms of attachment, if you're attached to love or money or anything, and you expect it to constantly be there, and you rise and fall based on that one thing or that one person, then you're in a lot of trouble, right?
Right. Just, anytime you cling to something that, intensely, because it's, love or anything that you're attached to is going to increase or decrease, that's going to put you on an emotional roller coaster. But if you're, more open to, here's something, opportunity for connection right now. Oh, well, it's gone now, but I enjoyed it while it lasted.
And there probably will be another one coming along. Right?
These are things that can happen dozens of times a day.
Well, all right. Then everybody should, and I'm sure that 95% of people listening to me could use this book, Love 2.0, How Our Supreme Emotion Affects Everything We Feel, Think, Do, and Become. And it's Barbara Fredrickson. Maybe you could give the website one more time.
Sure. It's www.positivityresonance.com.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, and I'll try to look on the bright side of things.
All right. Great. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Talking to you. Bye.
We're going to take a break, but first we should try to work on our positive emotions, because, on this show, if you're used to listening to it, there hardly are any. And we're going to go to our music. Music is actually the best thing for this, though. Did you want to go to a break first? Yeah? No? Yes? Okay. We will go to a break in a little bit, but we're lining up some positive emotion songs if we can find some. And but love, right? Love. people have their stories about love. You know, have you ever fallen in love at first sight? Sometimes it never happens to people. And sometimes they think it's love at first sight, but, you know, with men, it's not always love at first sight. It's something else at first sight. But I don't know. Some people have gone through their lives without ever having that experience. I have had that happen to me. And I know people who have had that happen, and other people not. And then also, if you go through life in a kind of a negative or survivalist ways, and most of the people I know are like me, you know, you usually hang out with the people that are like yourself. And I had a very negative upbringing, kind of lonely, negative. And I brought that forward into the adult world. So I usually wind up befriending people, with one or two exceptions, thank God, who are very crabby and sort of off-putting, like I can be, personally, no matter what I sound like on the radio, whatever. But, you know, if you're lucky to have that kind of thing, but it's true enough. I've tried this in my life. The few times I actually have tried it, if you deliberately try to, and people have told me, you know, you got to think positive. I mean, who could be more negative than me, right? We're cynical most of the time, but people tell me you got to think more positively because, you know, it's the only way to deal with life. And finally, in the end, your negativity is going to be contagious and it's going to build on itself, and that's all you're going to get. But no, and I've tried it, and the few times I have tried it, it works. But the negativity bias that she was talking about before can be so overwhelming that you bring forward from your childhood into adulthood that it's like trying to climb Mount Everest. It's astounding. It's how hard it is to do. It sounded easy when she was talking about it, but we all know it's the hardest thing to do. Yeah, is you is or is you ain't my baby? That's a simple question, right? Is you is or is you ain't? I don't want to hear all like Minster in between here, you know. It's a simple question, yes or no. But Ms. Fredrickson, who I just had on, would say there's an area in between. And besides which, you know, you isn't always somebody's baby. And, you know, sometimes you ain't. And it could be the one you love, right? You go in and out, you go back and forth. I mean, I'm just coming off. I mean, I'm rewriting a book that I had published 25 years ago. This is a book of stories, autobiographical stories, telling stories about my life, right? It's like a memoir, but it's broken down into separate autobiographical stories. And I told these stories on the radio way back in the day, and they were stories of my life. And it was a pretty extreme life, especially when I was growing up. And then even later, the crazy jobs I had involved violence, all kinds of things, divorces, all kinds of fights I got into, crazy jobs, money I had and lost. So I've had a pretty extreme life. But today I was writing about my relationship to my mother, which was, she was this very, very crazy woman. I mean, really crazy. Tried to commit suicide a few times, eventually wound up actually doing it, and was in and out of mental hospitals, you know, walking around without clothes on. I mean, a really crazy woman, and impossible for her to be anybody's mother. But when you're a kid and when you're a child in a house, you expect, you hope, I suppose to, like, you know, you expect to be loved, right? You expect to be safe, maybe. You expect to be loved. Doesn't work out that way, like we all know. And I'm writing this story now. Actually, it's written, and what I've done is rewrite all these stories in the book, because I'm going to issue it as an e-book sometime in mid-May for Kindle or people who have tablets or whatever. And so I'm just going over it again, because the stories were originally told on the radio, so they have a very sort of conversational, present tone. And I'm just sort of rewriting them to be more, not literate, you know, literature, but more sort of that they flow a little bit easier. They're easier to read rather than you have to hear somebody's voice tell it. So here I am today. I'm writing about, this is the one story about my mother, my relationship to my mother. And it was a defining thing all my life. And to this day, you know, now I'm in my late 60s, right? And only in the last couple of years of my life have I finally kind of, I can't say cast this off, but set it aside. My relationship to her was, and it was based on the most astounding neglect. There were threats, screaming, you know, like I say, suicide attempts, other things that happened that maybe I can't even talk about on the radio, not because it's against the law, but because I might not want to, right? So I'm writing all this today, and I'm coming off that, and I come into the studio here, and I'm just overwhelmed. I mean, I'm overwhelmed by it. But what I struggle for, and this has got to be, you know, something that people could recognize to a certain extent. It's a continuum. Either you know, like some people come from a house where, you know, it starts at, this is the highest level, right, where you had a good mother. Everybody raise your hand who had what you would call a good mother. No, wait. Okay, I got one here. I got one person who I am going to immediately donate to a museum because one of the few people I ever met. So people should come and look at him as an example, right? Anyhow, so I got one hand in the studio. But see, if you had a good mother, did you have a good mother, or are you just automatic? I think now, are you automatically saying that because you don't want to be like a bad boy or girl, right? Oh, no, my mom was great. No. You know what I'm talking about, right? What I'm talking about is somebody who was, now this goes back to cultural stereotypes. You know, mom, when I grew up, mom was at home and dad went out to work. This is the 50s I'm talking about when I was a little kid, right? Fathers went out to work and mothers stayed home and took care of the house and they cleaned and they cooked. But the mothers were the ones who took care of the babies and the little kids. The fathers did not do that. This sharing of, like, you know, the house fathers and you know, fathers that took care of their kids didn't even show up really until the 80s. And I got involved in it. My two kids were born, one in 1980 and one in 1985. At one point, I wound up being the one who took care of them, made the lunches, took them to school, brought them home, which was very difficult for somebody who didn't want to be anybody's father in the first place, who was more like a child himself. But I gave it a good shot. In fact, I have to say, after all these years, I gave it a pretty damn good shot, and I did a good job at it, more or less. But in those days, the wife was home, and the father went to work. So everything, and this is something that psychologists will, and if I asked Miss Fredrickson before, she would tell you too, that if you are, let's say, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and you have a certain personality where you find it hard to love somebody else, or you find it hard to accept love from somebody else, and it doesn't have to be just love, even kindness from somebody else, you find it hard to be open or friendly, or some people have social phobias, they just can't get along with other people. If you have trouble connecting with other people or receiving connection that's offered to you, most people in psychology or psychiatry will tell you it has to do with your mother, because that is the person that carries you around in them biologically. You're connected to them in a way you aren't to your father. When you're born, first person that you touch and the first person you're basically going to see and continue seeing is your mother. And back in those days, that's the way it really was. In other words, you saw your father, he went to work, then he came home, you saw him for a couple of hours, but all day long, you're with your mother, right? They carry you around. They're carrying you. Then you're in the, they put you in the crib. They change your diapers. They wheel you around in a carriage. Then they're in a stroller. Then they've got your hand. Then they're wiping off your mouth after they're feeding you. They're feeding you with a spoon in your mouth, right? And you're looking at them the whole time, and they're the ones that basically the rap is placed on them. But maybe it's unfair, but most psychologists, psychiatrists, even in the modern world, even with all the studies they do discover that what they thought originally was true. That if you have a good sense of self, you have a sense of self-confidence, you take care of yourself at least decently enough. If you don't accept insults or denigration from other people, if you think of yourself as a decent person, you probably got that when you were really little from your mother. And, you can get it in different ways later from mothers, fathers, uncles, whatever it is. But mothers are the ones where you get that, like that main connection where the juice flows or it doesn't. And I grew up in a place where that hardly ever happened. My mother spent a lot of her time in her room with the door closed, out of her mind, or taking so many drugs she couldn't get out of bed. Then if she ever emerged from her room, which she did once in a while, you may not even wanted her to do that because she was screaming or foaming at the mouth, even literally, or cursing or not wearing any clothes or threatening or attempting to hit somebody and threatening to kill herself when you're trying to have breakfast or something. So this is the kind of person I grew up with. So what you learn is how to watch out for yourself. So there's two things that happen if you grow up with somebody like that. You have to take care of yourself. And I don't mean like you have to get you have to get your own breakfast, right? If you want to eat, or maybe get your own lunch, or you have to find your own clothes and put them on. Nobody's going to lay them out for you. Mom wasn't ironing the clothes. She put in a good attempt. When she was in her sane moment, she would throw something into the washing machine. She would try to cook. Half the time it was burned. I had to put out fires from the stove because Mom was trying to make me something to eat. So the person is supposed to feed you so you survive. And I'm dealing with this all the time, right? So if it's not that, then what you develop a kind of a hard shell, and you develop a kind of a loneliness, and when you start living inside yourself. Some of this is going to sound familiar to people, right? And like I say, it's all on a continuum. But if you had a good mother who was present, who was there for you, who provided a sense of, you come home from school and she's got milk and cookies for you. You know, she's got a sandwich for you that she made, or she gives you a hug, or she asks you how was school, and she really means, she wants to know how school was, and she listens when you talk to her, right? These things, if you don't have them when you're little, good luck. However, this lady is saying that you can build that up again, but you'll never have the same experience, and even she would admit it, right? If you don't have that when you're young, you can get second best. You can work on it by replacing it with how you regard yourself. It's called loving kindness meditation. You can find somebody who loves you, and you're lucky if you do, right? Now, we all know that. I mean, I've been married 3 times, and the last one turned out to be a winner, right? I mean, I played the lottery a lot. And finally, I got a winning number. But, I mean, you know, you lose more than you win. But I'm staying. I was looking at the Devils, you know, my hockey team, the poor Devils, the New Jersey Devils, and they lost 9 in a row, right? Because their goaltender, for various reasons, they have no offense, and their goaltender is too old. He's got what the Greeks used to call hubris, right? He didn't go out when he should have gone out. You know, like champs and a lot of, you know, like ball players or boxers, how they stay around too long, even when they're already the champ. You got to retire when you're at the top. But this guy, this goaltender, is going to be 42 or something. He's not good enough anymore. He just can't stop the goals from going in. And you got to know when to stop, right? Now, you know, finally, if you find somebody who you've got a pretty good relationship with, do not bother to look anymore. Don't go anyplace else. Don't look any further, because you got it made. And you got to know that, right? So anyhow, I'm writing this story today, and I'm reliving, and it drives you crazy, because, you know, I have a vivid imagination, and I remember everything that ever happened to me, really almost like a computer, like an audio-visual computer. I remember things people said. I remember when they were standing when they said it, when I was 6 or 8 or 12. And it's a curse to have a memory like that, but it's good if you want to tell stories or write books, right? So I'm rewriting this whole thing and revising it, and I'm trying to watch out not to rush through it, because I don't want to live there anymore. I don't want to revisit this place, because it took me more than 65 years to climb out of this horrible state that I was in because of what I didn't get. It wasn't so much the abuse as the neglect. You know what? I think having had both, neglect is worse than abuse. In other words, if somebody is actively being mean to you, and of course you could argue it, the grass is always browner on the other side. How's that for negativity bias? But, you know, if somebody is, and I've heard this from shrinks too, if somebody is actually even beating on you, or somebody's abusing you or yelling at you, or somebody's being mean to you, at least they're there. You're with somebody. Now, I know this sounds backwards and upside down to people who've had this experience, and they're going to say, fuck you, you don't know what you're talking about. But I've heard this from people, and I feel the same way. I used to get this from my father. He would smack me. He would scream at me. He was dangerous, right? But what's worse than being abused, to me, is being neglected, to be completely left alone when you're little. To be left alone, to be abandoned when you're little. I don't think there's anything worse than that. And it's interesting, I was reading an article to prepare for this interview with this woman before, and there was a study done that said that the amount of people in the United States who identify themselves as lonely, first of all, who live in single households, and identify themselves as lonely, has increased tremendously in the last 20 years, 20 to 30 years. They did interviews with all people all over the place, a lot of old people and other people, single people. They found out that something like 30 to 35% of the people in the country identify themselves as feeling lonely or as plain lonely. And when you're like that, like this woman says, you're actually missing neurobiological connections, which release actual hormones in your body and fire off nerve endings, you know, like and zip off nerve endings that stimulate your muscles and your organs. People who are lonely have far higher incidences of immune disorders, of pain, of arthritis, that kind of thing, right? You know, when people say it hurts, you know, when they're talking about when they break up with somebody, it hurts so bad, or it actually does hurt. Loneliness is translated by your body into all kinds of physical diseases. You have less ability to resist pain and other illnesses, even mental illness, if you've been lonely or you are lonely. So really, probably even better to be hanging out with people who maybe you're not crazy about than to be sitting and by yourself. I've spent my entire life being alone or being lonely. And when I step out, the best way I do it is on the radio. And that's interesting because there's nobody here but my engineer. And I'll tell you something, he's a handsome guy, but he's not really that good company. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes he tells me what to do. He looks at me funny, but it's better than being alone. Oh, I got to leave? All right. See, that's what he's doing. See, right away, Now, I used to sit in the studio. I used to sit on the other side of the glass alone in this little thing. I felt like I was in outer space, like I was all alone. Now, so I moved back into the studio with the engineer. I'm a happy guy. So it's true. Connection is where it's at. All right. That's it for this hour. We'll be back after the 6 o'clock news to talk about what it's like from a Canadian's point of view. All this planet-destroying sludge oil that's being pumped out of Canada and down, hopefully according to the oil companies, they want this through the United States or shipped overseas. The worst kind of oil there is, this tar sands oil, bitumen from Canada. He's going to give me his Canadian point of view on this. So stay tuned.
AP Radio News.
And we're back. This is Mike Fader on, where are we? Sirius? That's it. Sirius XM Left 127. Sometimes I forget, right? We have been hearing a lot, of course, naturally, from people about the XL pipeline in this country, which, of course, how much did you want to bet on this, that the president's going to okay it, right? But he's just, waiting around until he can sort of slip it in on a Monday afternoon someplace. But the State Department has already done a review, although I think they're doing another review about whether or not it's okay. Now, the State Department gets involved about the XL pipeline because it crosses a boundary, and the boundary is from Canada to the United States. And I read an op-ed piece about all this a couple of weeks ago. It was actually April 1st in the New York Times, and it's called The Tar Sands Disaster, and the author is Thomas Homer Dixon, and he teaches global governance at the Balsillie School of International Affairs, and is the author of The Upside of Down, Catastrophe, Creativity, and the Renewal of Civilization. So he is Canadian, and he's up in Canada there, and he's got opinions about this from a Canadian point of view. And in America, it's an all-out war here. People are chaining themselves to pipelines. They're sitting in front of tractors. They're defying people who are trying to claim their land by eminent domain. It's breaking into a kind of a civil war down here. Well, I don't really know, since I don't follow it that much, is what's going on up in Canada, where all this stuff is coming from, and what people feel like up there. And I thought I'd have somebody on who might know about that. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you.
So the op-ed piece you wrote, and you call it the tar sands disaster, which right away sort of states, sort of where you stand, I guess, here. And one thing I'll start off with here is something from your article. It says, Canadians don't universally support construction of the pipeline. A poll by Nanos Research in February 2012 found that nearly 42% of Canadians were opposed. Many of us, in fact, want to see the tar sands industry wound down and eventually stopped, even though it pumps tens of billions of dollars annually into our economy. Interesting choice of words there, pumps annually. Yeah, but so, in this country, I would say probably if you did a poll, a huge poll of the population, you'll find that it's probably roughly the same thing. People have very false information in this country about, the number of jobs the pipeline creates. But the bottom line is, as you talk about in your article, is that this stuff is poisonous to all of us and to the entire planet. So really, but you're dealing with a conservative government up there too, right?
That's correct, yes. And they strongly support the development of the tar sands. I should say, just regarding that title, of course, an author of an op-ed doesn't have any control over the title.
I understand.
The paper chooses. But the other thing that's significant, in the States you often refer to this stuff as tar sands.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, it's almost, verboten to use that word.
Oh, really?
You need to say oil sands. If you say tar sands in Canada, you automatically establish yourself as some kind of freaky environmentalist critic.
Because tar has that pejorative sound to it.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's right. Really, we should just call it bitumen because that's what it is. But I think the dispute over whether it should be called tar sands or oil sands is really a bit silly. I mean, it's a really quite significant one in Canada.
But in Canada, things have gone so far up there. I mean, first of all, to be devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, as you say, this probably is providing more money one way or another by tax or by, maybe jobs for all I know. It's providing a tremendous amount of money, billions of dollars to the Canadian economy. But what is the Canadian economy that we're talking about? Is that the oil industry, or does this money actually find its way into, let's say, the social welfare systems or anything? You know what I mean? Taxes or whatever the government gets out of it. Is it helping all Canadians that this is being done, or what? Yeah,
it is. It's helping all Canadians. We're all, frankly, in some respects, on the tar sands dole, and most of the return from the industry goes to the province of Alberta in one way or the other. Probably about 90% of the returns go to Alberta. So Alberta, for instance, doesn't have a sales tax. It's got a relatively low tax rate. It has relatively high public service salaries for doctors, teachers. Of course, we have a national medical care system in Canada.
Right.
And all of that has been sustained by the oil sands revenue. But over a period of decades, you can reasonably estimate the hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue flow into the economy and into governments through taxes from this industry.
So it's
really, when we say some of us want to wind down the industry, we say that with complete recognition, fully aware that that would have enormous effects on the Canadian economy, because we really do benefit, at least in the short term.
Well, talk about hard sells. I mean, to convince people that the planet itself is being destroyed while their actual important needs are being met every day by this industry, that's a tough one. It's tough down here.
Well, it is, and I've had lots of folks write to me, of course, just absolutely livid in response to that op-ed, saying how could you be arguing for shutting down this industry when it helps pay people's mortgages and supports the healthcare system, and I'm really sympathetic to those arguments, but I point out in the article that there are very significant and somewhat unseen costs arising from the oil sands. Of course, the environmental costs are the most visible in some respects, and are probably the most understood. But I also talk about the way the oil sands industry or the tar sands industry is distorting the Canadian economy, and in some respects undermining our democracy and our open democratic conversation in Canada.
Yeah, you do mention here.
Go through that in some detail.
Yeah, you say Canada is beginning to exhibit the economic and political characteristics of a petrostate. Like what?
Well, on the economic side, if you look around the world at countries that generate a lot of their wealth from large pools of valuable resources, you find those economies tend to be imbalanced. They tend to go through boom-bust cycles. Investment tends to flow to resource extraction and away from other parts of the economy in question. And you also find they tend to be low innovation economies.
Which means what?
People get fat and happy from extracting the resources, and so they don't invest in things like manufacturing productivity or corporate R&D. And outside of the innovation in the resource extraction industry, and Canadians are very good at that innovation. We've developed some fabulous technologies, but outside of that, our economy actually is not a spectacularly innovative economy. It's rather second-rate, and that, I think, is in significant part due to the oil sands and the distortions the oil sands produce in the Canadian economy. And then there's the second part of the story, which is the political impact. And this is something that I think really has inflamed the Canadian conversation, because a lot of people are very concerned that what you have, again, in an economy with a very large concentration of wealth in one industry is that that industry starts to develop a great deal of influence over the government or the state. And,
right. We know about that down here.
Well, it's particularly acute in Canada because the Conservative Party has its base in Alberta. 25 of the 26 members of Parliament from Alberta are Conservative. A significant component of the Conservative Party, in some sense, one of the most powerful wings of the party originates in Alberta, and the Prime Minister has a seat in Calgary in Alberta. And so
it's really extraordinary. I mean, what about, are there a lot of campaign contributions from this industry to these people?
Difficult to track that stuff, but in Canada, the political and economic elites are actually very small, and especially in conservative circles, they travel in the same circles. They meet. They have a very strong ideological affinity with each other. So what we found in Canada over the last number of years, and this is one of the most significant things I point to in the article, is a dramatic cutback and imposition of constraints on climate science research, especially climate scientists working for the federal government within the public service, in, say, the Ministry of Natural Resources or the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Fisheries. These folks have seen their labs cut back, funding has been slashed, research facilities have been closed, and the scientists themselves have been told that they can't talk about their work without prior political approval.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that it's very unlikely that this kind of repression, frankly, of climate science would occur in the absence of oil sands' influence over the federal government.
Well, I mean, we have the same thing down here in various, like, for instance, in Texas, you know, I mean, and other, and like place like West Virginia, and we move on to another kind of destruction, which is, you know, mountaintop coal mining. All of that, and then you take fracking. All this stuff has the quality of being seduced and abandoned. You know, people are seduced by the amount of money, or the amount, like, for instance, a rancher or a farmer or just somebody who's a landowner trying to make it and not really making it. All of a sudden, some company comes along and says, here's $1 million, you know, for the mineral rights, or let us...
It's hard to turn that down.
Oh, yeah, I mean, people, you're just not making it. You're going to have to close up the farm. You have to close up the ranch, whatever it is. But that's what people do. But down here, EPA, you know, like environmental protection agencies and in states are defunded or unfunded. Reports are altered by the governor, or people are fired. It happens down here too, you know.
That's right, although less so at the national level, especially under the Obama administration.
But still, they talk about defunding the EPA, you know.
Yeah, there were practices like this under the previous Bush administration that got a lot of attention, but frankly, nothing as severe or significant as we're seeing in Canada. To give you one example, in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which has a significant climate file, a number of the scientists working in the Arctic have been told that they're not allowed to submit their research articles even to peer-reviewed journals without advance political approval. And even scientific research articles have to be reporting results that are, quote-unquote, in accord with ministry policy.
And the authorities are also clamping down on what they call radicals up there, which is just somebody who objects to this extraction and piping, right?
Well, this is the other part of it that I point to in the article, the other way our democratic conversation is being torqued, I guess you could say. The interests of a particular industry in some quarters have become associated with the interests of Canada. So if you criticize the oil sands, you automatically mark yourself as sort of anti-Canadian. Mm-hmm. And in fact, for senior political leaders in the country, it's virtually impossible for say, a leader of a major political party to suggest that the oil sands should be wound down or development should be curtailed in some way. That's pretty well a political death sentence. And there are quite explicit charges of acting against the Canadian national interest or unpatriotism.
What? Wait, really? Are there laws on the books, or? Well,
there's no laws in the books, but there's quite an extraordinary open letter from Joe Oliver, the Minister of Natural Resources, that he published. It's still online in January 2012, where he declares that quote unquote environmental and other radical groups are trying to undermine the Canadian economy, trying to shut down resource development, and then there's a sequence of statements: no jobs, no industry, no exports, which is just absurd. I mean, to paint the picture in these black and white terms and establish that large communities of people are somehow outside the boundaries of the community or anti-Canadian. I mean, frankly, a lot of the folks who are concerned about the oil sands and, for instance, trying to stop the pipeline to export oil sands product through the Rockies to the Pacific coast through BC, a lot of those folks are deeply patriotic. That's why they're involved. They actually think this is bad for Canada. And to declare that they aren't is again, a real attack, I think, on democratic process.
Well, I mean, it really is kind of a mirror image in a lot of ways of what goes on down here, although it seems more concentrated and particular up there. But here, we've discovered in the last couple of years that to protest the government or the banking system or political contributions or whatever, anything like, if you protest the system itself, you are almost defined as a terrorist. But I mean, literally, the FBI has investigated people like that. The anti-terrorism units of the FBI have investigated Occupy movements, which are 99%, nonviolent, and are talking about income inequality. They put them in the same character study as terrorists in the same file.
Well, this is all sort of the downstream effect of 9/11 and the securitization of our societies, and we've had a somewhat less dramatic move in that direction than in the United States, but still, especially in the security establishment, in police forces, and in national intelligence and national security groups, you see a tendency to divide the world into black and white. And I think, frankly, the Conservative Party is playing on that. Our Minister of the Environment has suggested that environmental groups are sort of cohabit with terrorists, and some of the language has been moving in that direction a bit. And again, this is deeply unfortunate. One of the things I wanted to do in the article in the Times was to just give Americans a little sense for the challenges we're facing north of the border. This is not just about possibilities of oil spills if the Keystone Pipeline breaks sometime in the future and pollute aquifers. That may be, for the United States, a perfectly legitimate and most important concern. But for us in Canada, it's really a matter of the future of our society in some ways.
Well, I know you have to go. One last question. What is being done up there that encourages you in terms of stopping this or reversing it? Anything?
I've received probably 3-to-1 of the hundreds of messages I received from Canadians, 3-to-1 in favor of the argument I was making, which actually surprised me. Of course, I got some absolutely vituperative messages from oil sands supporters, and I understand that. I expected that. But I did get the sense that there's a much broader sentiment across the country that something's going wrong here. It's going to be very, very difficult to turn this industry around. But Canadians need to start thinking about this. Here's the concern I have, where we might find ourselves in say, 15, 20 years. Let's say the climate change starts to produce some very significant impacts on something like the global food supply. And people start to get really scared. The leaders of China, India, and the United States and the European Union meet and decide to conclude a global carbon pact that includes some kind of carbon pricing regime.
Right.
Say by 2030. Well, 2030 is exactly the time when Canada is supposed to hit 5 million barrels a day of export of this stuff. And we could end up having a product that we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars in developing and producing that we can't sell. And that's actually really imprudent. If you're really conservative in the traditional sense, you're prudent and you think about the possible dangers of particular.
Well, that's true. The original sense of conservatism.
The original sense of conservatism.
Yeah.
And that's the argument I think we have to make to Canadians. And my sense from the response I got actually is that there are more folks out there in Canada who get this than one would think, which is a good sign. But it's going to be a long struggle.
Well, that's good to hear from this point of view, because down here, actually, this movement is gaining more strength all the time, and it's coming to be almost like a showdown at the OK Corral here. I mean, the oil companies and their politicians who are in their pockets against a very, very large, growing, anti-oil extraction and piping movement down here. We just had James Hansen, the NASA scientist, who's the most famous person who's written about this, who said it would be game over if Canada developed, the oil up there. He just quit NASA to devote himself full time to doing this, which is good news.
Well, people should be ready for Obama to approve this pipeline, but
I'm sure he will.
But that doesn't. This is just one battle in a longer war, and I think it's what has happened with Keystone has actually been very important because it's been a point of mobilization, and it's actually drawn a lot of people together in a way that hadn't happened before on climate issues, and that's really important. That's what we need.
All right. I mean, it's clear that these groups could work together across this border here. We could all be radicals together and do something right.
Right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Yes.
Okay. This is you're listening to Thomas Homer Dixon. That's Homer-Dixon, and he's a professor of global governance and international affairs in Canada. All right, we're going to, let's take the break early so we get it out of the way. And actually, I want to hear Dinah Washington again. Yeah, but let's take a break. If anybody wants to call on this, by the way, anything you heard, I forget sometimes that people are listening to me, right? I'm just talking out loud to myself. No, I know people are listening. If you heard anything in the last hour and 20 minutes that you want to call about, please be my guest. I mean, this whole XL pipeline thing is a big issue. The president's going to probably approve of this because he doesn't have the spine to stand up to the oil industry, and because he's going to look bad because of, theoretically, all the jobs. Jobs are a big thing. It's going to provide jobs. No, it's not. At the most, anybody in their right mind who studies this can clearly see it's going to provide, the XL pipeline is going to provide. First of all, this is not going to give us any oil. You understand that, right? America doesn't get any oil from this. It comes straight from Canada in a pipeline to the Gulf of Mexico, and it is shipped over to the rest of the world. If we don't build the pipeline here, if we shut this down, if people oppose it and it doesn't get built, the Canada is going to build a pipeline across the Rockies all the way to the Pacific, and they're going to ship it from there, from British Columbia. So one way or another, this stuff is going to get developed. To me, it's, you should really put your cards on the table here. I mean, when James Hansen, who knows more about this than almost anybody else, climate science, NASA scientist, when he just quit NASA, devote himself full time to opposing this kind of thing. He said if they developed, and he said this a few years ago, if they develop and work on extracting this bitumen or tar sand oil up in Canada, he called it game over for the planet. And you hear all the time people talking about, we're going to pass the tipping point for global warming, where we can't save the planet anymore, where there'll be uncontrollable droughts, which we're seeing now, temperatures which we have not been seen or even written about in history for hundreds of years, hotter than it's ever been before, ever. Even in the memory of people before they kept records, even in science, even in historical writings from 1500 or something. It's never been hotter, and the 80% of the Arctic ice is melted. Their water supply for something like 1.5 to 2 billion people in Asia, which comes from Mount Everest and all the mountains in that range up in Nepal and in Tibet, where there are glaciers. All of that is receding. The water is drying up. First of all, it's creating floods because it's melting. So there's these gigantic floods down from where the mountains are in India and Pakistan, right, and in the Himalayas. Now it's melting. Ultimately, there will be tremendous droughts. There'll be lack of water. The planet is killing itself. It's dying because of this. And people keep saying, we're going to pass the tipping point. Truth is, I think we've already passed the tipping point. This isn't my just negativity. When a guy says 3-4 years ago, like James Hansen, who knows, and I'm trying to get him on the show, when he says we're going to pass the tipping point, and he says it 3 years ago, and they have developed this, the worst kind of oil on the planet, this huge pool of oil, because, when they take this oil out of there, it's not because they take the oil out of the ground. It's also the way they do it. They use natural gas, heated natural gas, to extract this, and explosions and this stuff and the runoff and the water. It melts everything. And maybe we've passed the tipping point, in which case it's a whole different ballgame, a way of looking at the world. Can we go backwards? I don't know. I just read an article by Bill McKibben, who's the leading, anti-carbon guy in the United States, who's the head of, he wouldn't call himself that because he doesn't like to look at it that way, but he is sort of a leader. It's 360.org is his organization. He's a leader in opposing this kind of extraction and use of oil and gas. he claims that we still can reverse things. I guess you have to think that if you don't want to think the planet finally has had it. And it's just a question of a terminal illness and we're living in it. I don't know. Maybe it can be reversed. All right, we're going to go to a break, or do you want to take some calls first or what? Okay, anybody who's calling or has called or is called and is hanging on the line, keep hanging on and hanging in, and we'll be back after the break.
Sirius XM Left 127.
I think ethics is a huge problem in Washington.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left 127.
That's funny. That was that lady said, I think ethics is a huge problem in Washington. Ethics is not a huge problem in Washington at all. They don't have any. What's the problem? What is it Dean Martin said once? I drink to forget. And somebody says, forget what? He says, I forgot. Ethics is not a problem in Washington. There's no ethical problem in Washington. They don't even understand what it is. All right, we should take some calls. Jeff from Atlanta, you're on.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey.
Hey, I read with great interest an article in The Economist. That's one of my favorite magazines.
Yeah, it's a good magazine.
March 30th, April 5th edition. And they're actually cooling on man-made climate change. And the article was premised upon some comments that this Hansen guy made about his perception that the carbon may not be the cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted your perceptions, and I want to talk a little bit about mathematics involved.
I'm sorry, about the what?
Mathematics involved. I'm a mathematician.
Well, if you're going to talk about mathematics, you're going to have to do it on your own. Because
I want to talk about the algorithms that just came out in the 90s when they had computing power to do them, and what the implications of the reliance on these algorithms of this very immature science had to do with these projections.
Immature science.
Yes, very immature.
So
relative to chemistry, relative to biology.
So what you're saying, the bottom line is, I mean, without going into the mathematics, which I guess you could do if we could follow it, but I'm trying to get Hansen on it, and you know what would be a good idea? Not that I'm going to cut you off because you can talk after I'm done here, but when I get Hansen on, and I'm assuming I can get him on, then it would be great if you could call.
Sure.
And throw these things at him because he's the guy to answer it. But because if you're going to propose these kinds of things, there's nothing I could say about it because I don't even understand them. But the bottom line, I guess, is you're saying is that the idea of being terrified of climate change and all these things we're reading about, all these statistics that are being reported from every country. Like, for instance, I'm looking at something here. It got so hot in Australia in January that the Weather Service had to add 2 new colors to its charts. A few weeks later, at the other end of the planet, new data from the Chrysosat-2 satellite showed...
That has to do with what?
This is one.
Are you suggesting that global warming is causing these heat waves?
Well, absolutely, of course.
How so? I mean, you're looking at 3 million years of data, if you believe these guys, the credibility of which we don't even know, and they're saying that, oh, wow, this is a big anomaly, looking over 3 million years. We don't know if it's an anomaly or not. There's evidence to suggest that it's not an anomaly.
So as far as you're concerned, then I guess the bottom line, from your point of view, is that we shouldn't be worrying about this at all. We should just go right ahead and develop all this carbon.
Don't put words in my mouth now, Mike. My point is.
Well, you know what? You know what? Hold on. You know, I'm gonna have to cut you off if you don't listen. This is what we're going to call a conversation. I will talk, and then you'll talk. And if you want me to say that I put words in your mouth, you have to wait till I'm done to say it. You get it? Okay, now you go.
My point is that there may be man-made climate change. I don't think anybody's really in a position because of the immaturity of the science, particularly the idea from my perspective, and I'm a rate setter, an actuary.
Oh, okay.
And so from the idea that we've only had the computing powers with the girth to accommodate the sort of algorithms that these guys are throwing in since the 90s, the likelihood, the range of credibility of the information they're getting, also the possibility that they're considering all the variables, is remote. So, in my opinion, it may be happening, Mike. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody knows. And we're going to learn a lot more in the next 10, 20 years about this stuff.
So if we're looking at records, I'm sorry, were you done?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So if we're looking at records which clearly state all over the world that it's the hottest 10 years in Australia. It's the hottest, whatever, 10 years here, hottest 10 years there. Temperatures in Moscow, which killed, I don't know, thousands of people one summer, 2 years ago, whatever it was, never recorded. We're seeing things all over the world that have never been recorded in our history. And I understand you're saying that's limited because people weren't recording things for a long time, and we can't go, nobody's recording anything a million years ago or whatever. But all of these things that we're seeing, all of these records, you could look at it as if it's just one more swing in climate change that could have happened a million years ago or 500,000 years ago. We don't know that, and we might be getting all alarmed for no reason.
I'm suggesting to you that there are so many variables in the data that they're trying to consider in this, and there is some evidence actually Hansen, I believe, brought it out in The Economist commentary that we could have had this similar heat 400 years ago. And 400 years is not a long time when you're trying to look at 3 million years. So, my concern is that there's a lot of hysteria and a lot of people that want to throw big dollars at this, but I don't think we know a tenth of what's really going on.
Well, it could be right. I couldn't tell you, and that's why I have to limit the discussion like this as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you're free to talk, but it takes a guy like Hansen to come on and refute this. So I'm working. I sent out the invitation just a couple of days ago, so I expect him to be on maybe in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, so hopefully, and you can talk to him about it. One thing we can see, though, is that the extraction methods of mountaintop coal removal, fracking, the extraction methods for the oil sands up there, these things require gigantic, almost unimaginable amounts of fresh water and water in places where there is precious little water anymore. And the runoff from these places, from the coal mining, from the fracking, and from the oil extraction, the runoff has clearly poisoned in ways it couldn't have happened because we didn't have the industrialization to do it. It's poisoned hundreds of thousands of acres of land, in some cases almost permanently. Now, this is something which is a real worry that the planet has to consider, I think.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I haven't looked into the fracking, and I probably have to,
check. You know what? Check out the chemicals they use in fracking.
Yeah. Oh no, it's ugly. It's ugly.
Yeah,
I know that, and it's ugly, and those are chemicals that probably would be best kept far underground. But I just don't know enough about it, and I'm not right or left, but I think the truth is halfway on either side. And so it's hard for me to really you should check out.
I think what's probably the easiest one to understand is if you look into the effects of mountaintop coal mining and coal extraction in West Virginia and Kentucky. I mean, that's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. It's actually destroyed an entire state. Half the water in it. The mountains are gone. The state leads the country in emphysema, in you name it, right? And it's I
do actuarial workups for the workers' comp exposures up there. You have no idea.
But see, that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people get alarmed. Even if you can't prove the climate change, you can certainly prove the decimation that happens to millions of people from all these methods of extracting resources and energy, when people are saying, look at other ways to do it,
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that, and I apologize for jumping the gun on
That's all right.
First time caller, I get a little nervous.
No, on this, I have a terrible temper. I mean, to me, I'm just like, as soon as somebody like says one word crosswise to me, I mean, you'd think after 35 years in a radio I'd get better, but I haven't.
Just spice, man. Just a little spice.
I guess so. But when you get older, it's harder to digest spice.
I don't want to talk about age, man. I got 3 daughters. I'm just taking my middle one to the prom, and I don't want to talk about it.
Oh man. I understand it because you look at them and you realize that's how you judge how old you are, right?
Well, all I can say about 3 daughters is I think it's payback for offending womankind somewhere along my path.
See, you made a karmic mistake someplace and you got it in the face. That's what happened to you.
Clearly. But the odds are, I do a lot of work in the healthcare sector and post-acute care. Yeah. The good news is the odds are that at least one of my daughters will keep me out of the nursing home.
See, all right. See, you made an investment. Paid off. Okay.
There you go. Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, same here. Okay. Thanks for listening. All right. So who do we have? Kevin from Arizona. You're on.
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
All right.
Hey, listen, this is really interesting that you have this subject on, because just yesterday I was in Bridge City, Texas.
Oh, really? Yeah, I read about that.
Southeast section of Texas. It's east of Houston. And it's one of the places that has the largest concentration of petrochemical processing plants. In fact, that's where the Koch brothers have the majority of their plants down there. And why I was there is because I was picking up a boat. I drive a truck and I deliver travel trailers and boats and all that. So I was picking up a boat from a guy, and we started talking about these plants and that. And he told me something that I never even thought of about this tar sands. And of course, you know, most of it's going to be going to this area right near Bridge City.
And to be refined there, yeah.
Correct. And what he told me is that the past few years they've been building these huge storage facilities because it takes a long time to process this oil, you know, this goop that they have. So they're going to be storing it in these gigantic storage containers, you know, like tank farms. And, you know, I never even thought about that, you know, what the possibility of there being, you know, a disaster in one of these tank farms that's storing this crap.
Yeah, leaks, explosions, earthquakes.
I mean, it could be something that that terrorists could be interested in because, you know, who knows? We don't know what this stuff actually will do under different circumstances.
You know what? The terrorists are already interested in it. They're called David and Charles Koch.
Right, yeah, exactly.
They're the terrorists.
Well, yeah, I know that.
And, and here's something else that goes with it, because all this stuff works together, right? Fracking, they're discovering now all over the country, the methods of fracking, where they're setting off explosions underground and injecting all this water at high pressure, is causing literal earthquakes in places where they haven't experienced them before.
Right, yeah. Well, you know, interesting that you bring that up, too, because I had to drive. I'm driving across Interstate 10. As a matter of fact, right now I'm in New Mexico, but coming through Texas, all over the highway, they have these big signs up, seismic crew ahead. And, of course, you don't see them because they're way off in the desert, but they have these big signs on the highway alerting you that they're fracking. You know, of course, it doesn't say they're fracking. It just says seismic crew. Well, that's really what they're doing. They're fracking. And I guess in case you suddenly experience an earthquake, they want you to at least have seismic in your brain. You know. So
yeah. Well, as you drive the truck into a 50-foot gap in the road, you can think about what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, you were talking about the Koch brothers being terrorists. I mentioned terrorists could be interested in this. I was talking about the good kind of terrorists. You know, the ones that just blow things up, not the ones that decimate entire societies through their greed. And of course, I'm
right.
But
no, I understand.
They are worse. You know, I would much rather deal with a terrorist that's blowing things up than the Koch brothers.
Well, the amount of misery caused by people like the Koch brothers, which is to say, destroying, like just as a simple list, destroying the planet, unbalancing an entire society, income inequality, that kind of thing, poisoning our democratic systems, as you say, is a hell of a lot worse than a terrorist blowing something up.
Yeah. I mean, you know, at least they're doing it for what they believe to be a noble cause. Either it's a religious belief, which is ridiculous. However, they have some kind of a belief. They've got something really invested in this. The Koch brothers, they're worth God knows how many billions of dollars, and they want more. And willing to fuck anybody and fuck everything up in the world to get it. And it's really pretty disgusting. But the last point that I'll make is when I went, this is the first time I had ever been to Bridge City, and I could not believe what a beautiful place it is. However, as beautiful as it is, it's surrounded by these god-awful petrochemical plants. And you know, eventually, once they start processing this tar sands, my fear is that the place is going to be, you know, turn into like, you know, like 1960s L.A. when the smog was really bad.
Yeah, sure.
Because I know you're old enough to remember how the smog was in the L.A. area. I mean, at one time, it's beautiful compared to the way it was in the 60s.
Well, listen, I got to go and take some more calls. All right, thanks for calling. Yeah, this is what's happening with all this extraction is fracking and the coal mountain the coal removal. And it's it's not just us; it's the Chinese, the Indians, you name it. Everybody's like tapping gas fields and oil fields all over the world, digging coal out of the ground, blasting everything, injecting formaldehyde, which they use to preserve dead bodies into the ground. It causes cancer. I mean, all of this is happening. Sooner or later, all of the gas and all the oil and all the coal is going to be gone. We will have a dead planet, a poisoned planet, and nothing left. Food, no water, nothing. We will have destroyed our atmosphere, used up the water, destroyed our ability because of droughts to grow food. And what's left, right? And also people can have a lot of money, but then the biggest problem is to convince people is it supplies all the energy in the world. Everything, right? The entire modern world, all modern culture, even the growth of food, even the trucks that are moving the food back and forth, all the truckers that listen, the studio here, all the technology, cell phones, you name it. What the modern world is based on this energy. What people are saying, who are environmentalists, is that there are other ways to get energy. Germany, which is a fairly northern, dark country compared to other places, gets half of its energy on most spring days. Half of its national energy, it's a big industrialized country, from solar energy. It can be done. But the people in charge, the people who own politicians, just the way Don Corleone owned judges, they want to get rich at the expense of the entire planet. They're going to die soon. The Koch brothers are in their 60s. They're going to die. They don't give a shit. They don't care. If they have children, they don't understand that these children have to live and breathe in a planet that they're poisoning. This is what we're dealing with here. And every time we watch a ball game on TV or go and see a stadium lit up at night, so the two teams can play each other, so a bunch of rich baseball players can see who's going to win the pennant or whatever it is, everything we enjoy like this, we're not thinking about what it's doing to us. I mean, I'm as bad as anybody else, but it behooves us to start thinking about how we're just destroying the whole place. If we all got together and we all understood what we were doing and we signed and we voted, do we want to destroy the planet and have a comfortable, interesting life because we're amused by all our entertainments and because we can drive our big cars and we want to take our boats out on the river and we can do all the turn on the air conditioner? Are we happy with that at the expense of the future of the whole planet and of mankind? If everybody voted yes, okay, but I don't know if we all have a choice here. Who do we have? Elliot from Illinois, you're on.
Hey, Mike. I didn't get a chance to listen to the entire interview there, the second interview.
Oh, that's all right.
But one question I've always had, and I was wondering if he answered it, has to do with an argument you hear a lot from conservatives, at least I do out on the road, that we need the oil. And then so my question is that stuff really coming to the U.S. or is it being exported to China and other countries?
Well, the Canadian oil is going straight to other countries. It's not coming to us at all.
Yeah, well, that's what I've always thought.
Yeah.
But I've never had it corroborated, by somebody of his caliber.
Oh yeah, it's coming straight through. If they build this pipeline, it'll go straight to Galveston eventually and be shipped overseas. Or if they don't build a pipeline, the Canadians will build pipelines across the Rockies to British Columbia and ship it to China and other places, that way. So we're not getting any. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the people in BC don't want it.
I know. They've got a beautiful place there. They don't want it destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. And so since they can't get it through BC, they've convinced the American right that, you should put it through the states. And, so that's part of my problem. If BC doesn't want to do it, why should I want to do it?
I think they should build it straight through Washington, D.C., see how they like it.
Yeah, well, right. Put it right through the White House sitting room. And
I think
they feel about it.
Let's have the pipeline go straight through the Oval Office. Maybe it'll change the way he looks at it.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting in this, in terms of how the Supreme Court did that whole eminent domain argument.
Oh, man, yeah.
If a community and a business decides that they need this property in order to continue their business, then eminent domain applies to private business. And that's exactly what they're doing on that whole pipeline deal with people who don't want to sell their land.
Mm-hmm. They're seizing it. They're just
seizing it. Right.
Well, what they do is a two-step process. They offer them some absurd price for their land. When they don't take it, then they just take it. They'll take it away from them.
Right. Well, what happened to the free market? If I don't want to accept it, free market should say, well, then I shouldn't be forced to do it. But here it is, the duplicity and the hypocrisy of the Republicans and these whole market-based people who want to use market-based philosophies when it benefits them, but when it benefits the other side, then it becomes another story.
Yeah, well, it's the same. It's like you say, it's a nanny state, and it's socialism for them, and it's free, and it's freedom and liberty for us. We have the freedom and liberty to choose to die and to get taken over. They can get whatever they want from the government. Oh, we have a lot of calls. I'm just reminded. Right. All right. Okay. Who do we have? Jim from Louisiana. You're on.
Yeah, great show once again.
Thanks.
But like last night on Bill Maher, this is related. They had a guest, one of the had to get a guest on for 10 minutes, but he was talking about there was a way to kind of reduce the effects of the pollution through a technique of farming, and that would lower that would kind of absorb the effect of the what's causing the global warming.
Right.
But it's not really being introduced. And then at the end of the show, he does his little wrap up, and he was talking about North Korea and the U.S. military, and hinting at about the U.S. military industrial complex, how they're looking for another war.
Right.
Because and he pointed out like they've been like in 8, 9, 10 wars in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, yes, war. In fact, I'd say all of them. But then also, real quick, going with the planet, to change, like the body temperature, and I think of the environment we live in as basically like our temperature. A 5% increase in your temperature, my body temperature, you have a high fever, you're pretty sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem like much. At 10%, you're dead. So 10%, and that just totally changes, environments which plants live and animals live, So, somebody called up and was saying, well, we don't know. And true, we don't know whether this is just a little temporary spike or whatever. But, I don't trust industry, the oil industry or many industries at all.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree completely. Do we have, I think we have one more call we can take. Thanks for calling. We'll wind up with one more call for this hour. Listen, if you don't get to call about this issue, or you don't get to talk about this issue, and you can stick around till after around 7:30, you can call back because we got a guest at 7, and then we can go right back to this if you want. If we don't get to you, who do we have? Joe from Arcadia. You're on, Joe.
Is that me?
That's you, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not. All right. I wanted to disagree with your earlier caller who said there's no record of what the climate was over the last 3 million years.
Mm-hmm.
It's true that humans did not record it, but it did get recorded. If you look at the isotopes of oxygen and gas bubbles in ice cores.
Oh, right. I read about that. I forgot about that.
Ratios of foraminifera and in ocean floor cores. They record pretty clearly what the temperatures were. And this is a very scary anomaly.
Well, see, then, I remember reading that, and then I forgot about it. I don't retain scientific and mathematical information too well, but I do recall reading about that scientists can measure what the temperature of the planet was like for hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years by checking these things you just mentioned, and it shows that this is an extraordinarily, off-the-charts anomaly here.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. So there is the record. That's so for that man who's listening. There are ways of checking, even if it hasn't been written down by human beings. Well, thanks for calling.
Thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. I guess do we have one more? We'll take one more call. Who do we have? Fred from New Hampshire. We got about 2 minutes for you, Fred.
Okay, thanks for having me on. I just wanted to say that the people who are denying the climate change problem are like the same people who deny evolution. If most of them don't know anything about it, and as soon as you start to delve into it and you look at the science, it's irrefutable. It is happening. Just like evolution, it's not a theory. I mean, it is a theory, but theory doesn't mean it's just some hypothetical thing, because gravity is also a theory. And they just base their opinion on not having facts. And one of the other dangers here with this global warming is that there's huge amounts of methane that are trapped below the thermophrost, not only on the ground, but also in the oceans. And it's starting to seep up. And this is a really scary thing because it has about 10 times the heat trapping capabilities of CO2. And the amount of methane that is being released and the temperatures are far more exceeding any of the projections that all these scientists have put together, and they're pretty scared.
So, in the 1 minute that's left here that I can afford to give you, because the show's at the end of the hour until we start again after 7, you think there's any hope?
Well, I'll say it in this way. I've got a biology degree. All species kind of follow the same thing, and the formula basically is it's like bacteria on a plate. You have all these nutrients, they overrun it. Once the resources are gone, population crashes. We're doing the same thing.
Okay, well, it's been nice talking to you. I guess it's the last time we'll ever speak.
I hate to be gloomy, but we
no, I mean,
the same thing.
A fact is a fact. So now we have the choice, since we're all going to be gone in a short period of time, whether we're going to be good to each other or bad to each other.
Well, if we could do something, we have the capability to change this, but unfortunately, human nature is what it is.
I know.
It only acts in terms of crisis situations, and then it's too late.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Positive.
Take care.
Yes, that wasn't fair, because nobody's worse than me. All right. That's it for this hour. Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 27? Why do I forget that all the time? I don't know. Maybe if I got a raise, I would remember it. That's probably it, That's what it is. Because raises are very good. Scientists have shown that good raises at work heighten brain cell activity and memory. Proven. Okay, so we'll be back after the 7 o'clock news with an examination of President Obama's Let's Help the Rich and Step on the Poor budget. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader. Once again, I want to remind you, as I do every week, that if you want to get in touch with me, tell me about anything, comments you have on what the show is here and what you heard tonight or any other time, what you'd like to hear, go to my website, FederFiles, FederFiles.com, FederFiles.com, and you can get on my mailing list, and you can send me any of your comments or questions that you have. All right, so the President of the United States, Mr. Obama, has introduced his very large, very complex budget, and he has sent it to Congress and given it to the American people to look at. But it's very complex, and it involves lots of things, and we have to examine it because it's important, obviously. We don't know which way it's going to be voted up or down and what sections will make it and what won't, but for somebody who really has sort of taken a good look at it and who knows about these things, we thought we'd get some commentary. Now, we have somebody from the National Priorities Project, actually the research director of the National Priorities Project, and they have an overview, in fact, a deeper examination, but we're going to take an overview of the budget. And we're talking to Mattia Kramer, who is the research director at National Priorities Project. And maybe you could explain what that is, National NPP.
Yeah, National Priorities Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan federal budget research organization. Our mission is to take the federal budget, something that's very complex, as you noted, and turn it into something that is transparent and accessible so that Americans of all walks of life have the opportunity to understand where their tax dollars are going and then also to influence how their tax dollars are spent.
So when you look at this budget, how do you approach it, first of all? I mean, you look at it, you have to break it down, obviously, into revenue and spending, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, when the day that it comes out, we go for, the top line, the sort of overview stuff, revenue, spending, absolutely, and some key facts about it. And it's in the days following that we dive into, there's tons and tons of data released, raw numbers, and then make sense of all of that and sort that all out to give more deeper analysis.
So when you look at this budget, and when you look at when you give us an overview of the budget, what things stand out for you, or what things might be unexpected or surprising, and what stands out?
Well, this year we're talking a lot about the inclusion of a change in the way Social Security cost of living adjustments are calculated, and we're talking about that because that's received a great deal of attention in the news media, so we want to make sense of that for people who don't necessarily know what exactly is being talked about. There's this concept of changed CPI, which I think to most people sounds totally obscure. It's basically a different way of calculating inflation, and the effect would be to cut or reduce Social Security benefits over time for retirees. And so this has received a great deal of criticism because Social Security is such a popular program, and that's something that's true regardless of political party affiliation. So in the general public, Americans, no matter how they identify, left, right, center, tend to think Social Security is a good thing, and we shouldn't cut it. We want to keep it around. So this has received a lot of attention this year.
And so that's the main thing. I mean, we've had guests. We had a guest on here last week who was explaining the change CPI. The bottom line is, whatever the formula is, however you explain it or how complex it is that eventually people getting Social Security over a period of 10, 15, or 20 years are going to wind up with something like $15,000 to $18,000 less dollars than they had before. This is from an amount of money which barely gets them by already. So. And then the other discussions, which are, this is money that people put into a separate trust fund. How is it that they would not be able to get out as much money as they should, especially when the cost of living goes up? So we've had this discussion. So what else is a major thing in this budget? On this show, sometimes we're not too fond of Obama and his policies and what he chooses to be. From your point of view, let's say call it a national priority here and there. But maybe you could point out some things in this budget which you find to be positive and helpful and useful.
Sure. Well, the president put numbers to his proposal that we heard in the State of the Union address in February about expanding and making universal pre-kindergarten education. So that's something that at National Priorities Project we think jives pretty well with what the American public wants. What we do is we look at opinion polls and we try to have a sense of where public sentiment is at, what do Americans want. And in general, people say more spending for education. And so this is a landmark proposal that he's included in his budget this year to make pre-kindergarten education universal. That would certainly be a signature achievement of the president if he could manage to get it passed.
Does one thing depend on the other? In other words, if you cut one thing, that funds the other. Are we choosing young children over older people?
Absolutely not. They're separate proposals. They have no relation to each other about whether they will become law or not. The president actually proposes funding the universal pre-kindergarten education with higher taxes on a variety of tobacco products. And so he says that it wouldn't add anything to the budget deficit. That was a debt and deficit were a major focus for him in this budget. And he says that this new initiative would not add any money to the deficit.
Maybe you could explain something to me, which I never quite understood, or maybe because it wasn't made that clear, or maybe I just don't get it. When the thing you just mentioned, that the pre-kindergarten universal education would be, which is obviously an essential thing, especially in such a competitive world we're living in. But you say the president said it would be funded by higher taxes on tobacco. Does it literally work that way? In other words, part of that tax is collected separately and aimed straight at that program?
So it actually depends. For some programs, that is the case. And actually, Social Security is a good example, right? Because we pay taxes specifically for Social Security. Yeah. You often see it on your pay stub. It says Social Security. Right. That money does go into a trust fund, and there's a special accounting measure, and lots and lots of paperwork and calculations about the Social Security trust fund and its financial status. So for some taxes and programs, that's true. And there's other things, and we actually don't know yet whether that would be the case for this proposal, whether this tobacco tax would be create a trust fund which would specially fund the program. Mm-hmm. It certainly could be set up that way, but it's not necessarily the case. It could be that the president is merely saying these new taxes would offset the cost of pre-kindergarten education, and therefore it's deficit neutral.
So, and then obviously the other thing that people are concerned about, or and then it depends on what side of political spectrum you're talking about, but the Defense Department budget. I mean, how does that fare here?
Yeah, this is actually an important point because we've heard a lot about cuts to the military. This has been something that's been in the news a lot with the sequestration, that term that means across the board federal budget cuts. So we've heard a lot about the Department of Defense seeing its funding cut. The president actually proposes a very modest 1.6% cut in military funding. So that's for the Pentagon's base budget for 2014. So that's much, much smaller than these automatic spending cuts would slice from the Pentagon's budget in 2014. So essentially, the president is saying, let's spare the military from deep cuts and find savings elsewhere in the budget.
Well, that's a pretty impressive, provocative choice, right? I mean, a lot of people are saying, and a lot of people examine this. In fact, I read an article you wrote for Tom Dispatch about taxes and the way taxes are spent.
Yeah, right. And it's quite, in fact, popular that the Department of Defense actually see some budget cuts. Americans, by and large, say that the Pentagon could afford to. It's funded with many hundreds of billions of dollars each year, and Americans say, in general, we're in favor of a strong military, but there's fat to cut in that budget.
Well, I mean, everybody points out the F-35 fighter jet, the one that costs what? It's going to wind up costing $100 billion, and it doesn't work,
Yeah, actually, significantly more than $100 billion. We've spent nearly $100 billion on it so far, and there's many, many more billions of dollars slated to be spent on that program before it's done.
Well, and I don't want to get into that, but a lot of people do feel that way. Here's something from the Tom Dispatch article. It says that you wrote, category by category. This is, let's see, Americans, what Americans want is pretty clear. I'm paraphrasing. Despite near constant news about how polarized our nation is, a careful look at opinion polls indicates that a strong majority of Americans actually have a coherent to-do list for Washington. We want more jobs, smaller deficits, more education funding, reduced reliance on fossil fuels, higher taxes on the wealthiest, plus the kicker, I'm reading here, Medicare and Social Security benefits preserved. It's the typical story of wanting to have our cake and gobble it down too, right? And you say here that in fact, in your opinion, we could have all these things. They could be they could all be funded. We could have them all and it would work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I spend all day, every day with budget numbers, and in putting together a sort of outline of what Americans want and how much it would cost, we absolutely could do all of those things at once, in part because Americans want to reduce spending on the military. They want to raise taxes on the wealthiest and on corporations. And between those two things, there's a great deal of savings to be had, and the other things that Americans want could be easily funded with new revenue or savings from those areas of the budget. So education spending, or I mentioned using a carbon tax as a means to get us away from fossil fuels. That creates revenue itself.
Well, there's something like a financial transaction tax.
And there's not polling on that specifically. A financial transactions tax was something proposed by the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House this year and last year as well. So that's certainly an idea that's out there, although, getting it through our, the politics, politics in Washington as they currently stand, that's where the trouble lies.
Well, then the other one is, there's the cap on Social Security taxes that could be adjusted.
Yeah, well, and this is something that's especially wild about why the president has proposed the change CPI to reduce Social Security benefits, because Social Security is not in immediate crisis, nothing of the kind. The program is on completely sound financial footing for about the next 20 years, and after that it can still afford to pay about 75% of total benefits through like 2086. And so basically this program just needs some minor tweaks, and one of them absolutely would be changing the taxable maximum, because right now workers only pay Social Security taxes on about their first $113,000 of income. And most Americans don't even know that Social Security taxes disappear on those higher income levels because most of us never reach that income.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the income tax itself, now it's up to 39% or something like that after a certain point. But
yeah,
it could be a lot higher.
Very, very wealthy.
Yeah, if you make $450,000 and up or something like that.
right? Which is a group that's even smaller than the top 1%. It's like the top 0.6% of Americans.
Well, the president is nothing if he is not a compromiser and a political weather vane. Maybe more than almost any other president I've seen in my lifetime. Anyhow, he just seems to blow the way the wind blows and tries to do what he can do in terms of compromise and pleasing these people and pleasing other people. Makes promises, he breaks, whatever. He's a real politician as much as anybody ever was. But it seems to be, from my point of view, and you could correct me budget-wise if I'm wrong, we don't have to touch Social Security. We could probably alter Medicare by reducing costs, not reducing benefits, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And that's something included in this Tom Dispatch piece. Right now there's tons of waste in our healthcare system, and by changing the way we pay for healthcare, moving away from a fee-for-service system, we can incentivize healthcare providers to stop doing the things that aren't making us healthier. Right now there's tons and tons of tests and procedures ordered that have no medical benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So we could save money in the Medicare program and not cut benefits. And that's what I was referring to, when I say, do we want to have our cake and gobble it down too? Well, we actually can do both. We don't have to choose. We just have to be smart.
I've spent a lot of time talking about the Occupy movement on this show. In fact, I have a other radio show which is entirely devoted to that. And the basic point of the Occupy movement, or their goal to adjust or to repair, is income inequality in the country, which is astounding at levels maybe it's never been before. And does this budget address income inequality?
Certainly not explicitly. The one thing that you might point to is the president is proposing limits on tax deductions for the wealthiest Americans and a Buffett rule. So he's acknowledging that right now our tax code is essentially a playground for the very wealthy. And Warren Buffett has made this famous by saying, he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary does. And so the president does propose a Buffett rule, in other words, a minimum tax rate on the wealthiest, so that they would never pay a lower rate than middle-class Americans. And then he also proposes limits on tax deductions. And I know that sounds, sort of obscure and boring to most people, the notion of tax deductions and limits on them or whatever. But what he's saying is we're going to limit the extent to which our tax code is simply a playground for the wealthy and talented accountants, and ensure that the wealthy are paying some minimum share toward shared prosperity, whether it's infrastructure investments or education funding or what other priorities Americans have.
What about one of the things you mentioned in your various comments here in this article in Tom Dispatch? By the way, if you just tuned in, we're talking to Mattia Kramer, who is the research director for National Priorities Project. Tell people where they can go online to get a good view of this budget and how you broke it down.
Sure. Our website is nationalpriorities.org. There's quite a lot of information there. There's certainly lots of information about the president's recent budget proposals, how it compares to the Ryan budget, for instance, or the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget. There's also information about tax day, and of course our taxes are due on Monday. There's information about where your taxes went. You can get a personalized tax receipt. There's tons of stuff there, so it's nationalpriorities.org.
A personalized what? What is that?
A personalized tax receipt, so you can enter how much you personally paid in income taxes and see exactly how and see exactly how our federal government spent that money. Absolutely.
Do I really want to know?
Well, it will be heavily tilted toward the military.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess part of what I earned last year went to fund a drone, probably.
That's right. We all contribute to those costs, and that's part of the taxes that we pay.
Well, that's why we elect our representatives to fairly represent the American point of view. But it's one thing to propose a budget, and this is getting into politics, maybe not your purview, right? It's one thing to propose a budget which may look good or may do the right thing. But the trick is always in how it's followed up and pushed by the administration and the majority party, let's say, in the Senate, right?
Yeah, I mean, many people say simply the president's budget is dead on arrival, and that's certainly been the case in the past couple of years with the president proposing his budget. And it's from my perspective, it's frustrating, of course, because the work that we do to analyze the budget and talk about what Americans want, and then lately in Washington, we've seen a totally off the rails federal budget process where we don't have any real budget in place, and we have these sort of temporary spending bills called continuing resolutions. So absolutely, the president has proposed a budget. Whether anything in this becomes law at any point is absolutely up in the air, including the notion of the chain CPI and Social Security cuts. And I've actually said, many people have asked me, well, why on earth would the president propose cuts to Social Security?
Mm-hmm.
And hey, on the one hand, just about anything the president has ever put in his budget has never made it into law. So maybe if the last thing he wanted was to cut Social Security, maybe he ensured it wouldn't happen by putting it in his budget.
Which is sort of like the umbrella principle on rain, right?
Something like that.
Either when you bring it, it doesn't. If you don't, it does. But I don't think that he would. I don't know. I can't. Who knows what's in the man's mind? I mean, he's got a political party. He doesn't have to run again and be elected, but his party does, right? And to be the head of a party that's the first Democrat in 70 years to propose a cut to one of the most popular programs ever in the history of this country, it's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a tack that many of his colleagues in the Democratic Party are very, very unhappy with. It may be that this is long forgotten by the time folks are going to the polls again. It's really not clear, but exactly what he was thinking in proposing this is really anyone's guess.
Well, to paraphrase H.L. Mencken broadly, nobody, to bet on the fact that Americans have a short attention span is a pretty good bet. So,
unfortunately, cynically, that may be true.
So, as far as the budget goes, let me ask you a question. You spend all your time. What's your background in terms of, economist or what?
Sure. An undergraduate degree in economics, and my master's degree is in public policy. So I'm a budget generalist, not just the numbers, but also what do the policies mean, and examining them for issues such as social justice,
right.
Income inequality. So looking at a policy holistically rather than just from the perspective of the numbers.
Now, you just used two terms, social justice and income inequality. Right away, that might, if people wanted to do that, cast you in a certain light. But your organization is bipartisan, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So because somebody who's a conservative or Republican wouldn't use those phrases.
Well, that could be true, but I think that most people consider themselves to be in favor of social justice, whether they're conservative or liberal. It's a difference.
No, I'm just using the linguistic. You know what I'm talking about, right? When people use those phrases, they usually turn out to be, or generally are, liberals, right? Certainly, income inequality is something that a Republican only use to refute the fact of it.
That's true. I mean, people on the right of the political spectrum think that income inequality is less of a concern, but rather equality of opportunity is the objective. And of course, achieving equality of opportunity is very difficult, and it's easier to address income inequality. That's through policies. Equality of opportunity is very tricky.
Well, these questions, just to prepare for this question, I mean, and if you can't answer this, I can understand it. If you were, in the most general terms, preparing a budget for the United States of America with this gigantic debt that we have, which everybody agrees can't go on forever the way it is, if you were preparing a budget, and maybe you can't say this because of your organization, what would your budget look like?
Oh, I can say it, and
okay.
I just wrote it in this Tom Dispatch piece.
I just want to make sure, since you say nonpartisan, it's not
Yeah, and we are nonpartisan. I mean,
okay.
we're happy to be critical of actions from both parties, and our job is to hold up what Washington is doing and compare it to what the American people want.
Oh, okay. So then we're just talking about what you see is popular and what people want, and then what the numbers actually are. So what would your budget be?
Exactly. Yeah, so I think I laid it out pretty in not uncertain terms in the Tom Dispatch piece.
I think so, yeah. But you should tell people. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, so in terms of deficit reduction, which you've just mentioned, there's huge savings to be had by reducing military spending, and in ways that make us not unsafe, but safer. Because right now we have a military that is focused on Cold War technologies and very outdated stuff that's very, very costly. So think tanks left, right, and center have put out reports about how we can find substantial savings in the military budget. So that would certainly be included in my budget, and that's shown to be popular with the American people.
Mm-hmm.
I would close loopholes in the tax code to raise new tax revenue from the wealthiest, and similarly from corporations. Corporations right now, some pay no tax, no federal income tax at all, and some pay a rate of 30%. So there's no need to have that kind of uncertainty in our tax code. Those kinds of changes would raise substantial new revenue, huge savings, deficit reduction, while still allowing us to invest in things that are really important, according to Americans, such as job creation, education spending. Folks are interested in figuring out how to move away from fossil fuels. I think there's room in the budget to do all those things and run smaller deficits. And there's no reason that we have to choose.
And I think maybe the last thing is maybe we could all agree on this. Is certainly it seems like most Americans agree on it. There is really no need whatsoever to whatever fancy formula you come up with to in any way cut Social Security benefits in any formula in any manner whatsoever. Let alone the fact that we should actually be raising it, the cost of living adjustment.
That's right. There's evidence to suggest that the cost of living adjustment is too slow. In fact.
Oh yeah.
Who are receiving Social Security benefits disproportionately spend money on health care, and that health care costs rise faster than the general inflation rate. So, no, I certainly, if I were creating the budget, I would not cut Social Security benefits. There are many other ways to restore the full financial solvency of the program for even more decades than is currently projected. So I think that there's much smarter ways to move forward than what we're seeing out of Washington, although that will probably come as a surprise to no one.
Well, I like this idea of checking in with National Priorities Project and seeing exactly where you would fill out, I guess, some kind of form or something, and then you'd find out exactly how your taxes were spent, right?
That's right. I mean, folks can go to nationalpriorities.org right now, and if you click on interactive data and your tax receipt, you can enter how much you personally paid in taxes and see exactly where that money has gone. And if you don't like the way Washington is spending your tax dollars, then it's our responsibility, all of us, to get involved, to speak up. Congress works for us.
That's what I heard. I heard. They taught me that in school, anyhow. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Okay. Mattia Kramer, who is the research director at the National Priorities Project. Interesting. You should plug in there to this place and see exactly what they did with your money. A lot of it, as she suggested, probably went to making us safe, the homeland, uber alles. So maybe we should take a break right now. And when we come back, all those people who called before about natural resources, climate change, the XL pipeline, anything else you were calling about, feel free to call again. And right after the break, I will mention one more thing, which I find fascinating, and I hope everybody listening to me gets involved in it. I'll mention that after the break. And right now, why don't we go to the break?
Sirius XM Left 127. Opinionated.
Obama healthcare plan, I think everybody should have that kind of access.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left 127.
Okay, here we are. Just like the man said, Sirius XM Left 127, Mike Feder. It's Feder, in case you're writing to complain to some authority. One thing I wanted to mention, we've got a couple of calls here. One thing I wanted to mention is that I was hoping that everybody who hears about this could get involved in this, because it seems it's like an extraordinarily inspiring thing. There's a petition circulating now. I guess it's on the internet and will be presented. It's aiming at 500,000 signatures. I don't know if that's a certain cutoff point, but there's a lot of people who were signing a petition. In fact, I did the other day, and I'm encouraging everybody I know to do it, to give Bradley Manning the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I'm sure that stirs up a lot of powerful feelings in people, but I think it's a wonderful idea. Bradley Manning, whatever his personal problems or, disturbances. I mean, he was a kid when he leaked all these documents, the WikiLeaks, but the documents he leaked were about lies and manipulation, and about warfare and the way it's conducted, and about war crimes conducted by the United States. Basically, the effect of all this, so far nobody has proven that anybody's gotten harmed who's an American citizen or abroad or here by this. What he did was he was over in Iraq, and he was a part of a team that was helping airstrikes and military and sort of commando raids on various places. He was following up behind using technical stuff. He was a computer whiz, and he was helping people kill other people. And often he came across things which he found to be morally objectionable. The most famous one is the attack helicopter, where he got the audio and the visual of an American attack helicopter murdering people who weren't designated as combatants, and they had no reason to believe they were combatants, but they just wanted to kill somebody. And this happened all over the place in Iraq, and it happens in Afghanistan. And then when people came to rescue these people, the helicopter attacked them and gunned them down and killed them too. Innocent civilians. And this was the most powerful thing. This is the first thing that leaked out. And then he leaked out all kinds of other stuff. This guy basically did this in part, and maybe in more than part, to stop war and to stop our kind of warfare in this country. That's what the Nobel Peace Prize is for. That's what it's for. It's an international prize, and it's described in the awards rules. It's an award that's given to somebody who does his best in as universally, understandable a way, and in as wide as possible, it's spread as wide as possible to stop war, the process of war, and contributions to war, to make peace more prevalent on Earth, basically. And I'm paraphrasing. That's what the Nobel Peace Prize is for. It was given a couple of years ago to Barack Obama. Here's a guy who put 60,000 more troops in Afghanistan. Tens of thousands of people, including American soldiers, were killed and wounded by this. And also, he is the drone meister. He's the one who every Tuesday gets together and approves who to murder overseas. And at this point, it includes somewhere between 700 and 1,000 innocent people, civilians, non-combatants. He's a mass murderer. Whatever way you look at it, he is a mass murderer, even just the facts of it. I know that's carrying a very heavy moral weight to say that. But in fact, the man is the commander-in-chief of the United States. He commits all these troops to Afghanistan for no good reason, a war that can never be won, just to create more terrorists is all it does. And thousands of people are killed and wounded, a lot of them civilians. So he has done all this, and he continues to do this. They gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. And obviously the reason they did this, the people in Oslo and Norway who did it, not because they're completely out of their minds or they were hallucinating. They clearly, as far as I could tell, they were giving him the Nobel Peace Prize to urge him to stop being like this, to stop using drones to murder people in about 52 different sovereign countries, and including army bases set up and commando raids and special ops troops. They were giving him this prize to say to him, don't do this anymore. We're giving you this prize as an advance reward from stopping acting this way, right? Don't do this anymore. But here's a guy who is responsible for the deaths of thousands and thousands of people and the wounding and maiming of other thousands and thousands of people. Vast misery to other people on the face of the planet. They give him the award. I think it should go to Bradley Manning. And if Americans got together, there's already like 55,000 signatures to a petition here. If 500,000 Americans got together and it came from America to recommend that he get the Nobel Peace Prize, it would really, I think, set things straight in the world and maybe get us back a little bit of all the respect that we have lost over the decades, if we deserve any at all, right? All this talk all the time about that presidents are making, or Congress people or military people. We are there to spread democracy. Well, of course, it's total bullshit. Maybe if we want to get a little more respect, and maybe we just want to do the right thing, we could actually stimulate the Peace Prize to be awarded to somebody who really was acting for peace, not somebody who was acting for death and war, and for the weapons makers like Obama. The way to do this, to sign this petition, which I've already done, is to go to a place called Roots Action. Just Google this, ROOTS, rootsaction.org, rootsaction.org, and scroll around there or search, and you'll find the petition, and they put it a lot better than I just did, to nominate Bradley Manning for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I would love to see him get that, and I would like to see it come from the impetus and the inspiration to come from America. I would love to see that. Meanwhile, we are ready to take your calls now. So anybody who was calling before about Keystone or about climate change or about oil policy, if you want to talk about what I just talked about, if you want to talk about anything else that's political and the budget that we just talked about, and Social Security and defense, revenues, taxes, this is the time to call. 866-997-4748. 866-997-4748. And who do we have? Cynthia, you're on, Cynthia.
Hello?
Yeah, you're there. You're on.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, you're on the radio. Did you want to talk?
Yes, this is Cynthia. Hi, sorry. Yeah, I had a couple of comments. I was just listening to your what you're saying about Bradley Manning. And,
Yeah.
You know, it makes me wonder, who are these people who decide who earns these awards, the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, there's this committee. I don't know who forms the committee. Maybe they are all Norwegians. I don't know, or they come from other countries. I'm not sure who's on the committee.
Okay. Well, you know, I called a while ago, so my comment or what I wanted to talk to you about was the pipeline, and, you know, it occurred to me that we have so much propaganda about, you know, how, you know, we need to build pipelines so we can have jobs, and, you know, the economy needs it, blah, blah, blah. Right. You know, we need to have a common sense, I think, argument going out from all of us who are involved in these grassroots movements about we have a critical choice here, a critical timing. Do you want to live or do you want a pipeline? And I'd love to see, you know, advertisements, something like the cigarette commercials or, you know, anti-cigarette, anti-tobacco commercials where, you know, you see these people who are dying and gasping for air, who are living on life support, who say, gee, I wish I hadn't smoked that pack of cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's create ads like that because that's what's going to come to. I have no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah, it's already coming to that. It's just going to get a lot worse, although people feel like it's not happening to them. I think if you lived out in the, you know, in the Southwest or part of the Midwest where they have a drought that has set records and people are going out of business who are farmers and food is actually going up in price because it can't be produced. All of these things are attributable to global warming. So it actually is affecting people already, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that I know. But I mean, as far as life, you know, a choice of life or death basically is what we got going on. Not just, you know, slow death by starvation, but because you just can't plain breathe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, really getting these drastic messages out there to the public, pumping goes up because it's true. I mean, you know, I have no doubt about that. I have seen firsthand the effects of pollution, and I could go on studying examples of what I see happening in the environment. But you know, it's all happening, and we got to pump up the message.
Okay, all right. Thanks for calling.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, who do we have? Charles from Indiana. Hey, Charles.
Hey, how are we doing today?
All right.
That's good. The Nobel Prize Committee, they have to be nominated by a member of the Swedish Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, that nomination then goes to the Nobel Prize Committee, which I think is also selected by the Parliament, and then they have to put the person up for that prize.
Well, but they can be encouraged to nominate somebody by.
They should be sending those petitions over to members of the Swedish Parliament.
Mm-hmm. Where did I get the idea that I'm totally off here? Maybe Wikipedia has played me a silly joke, but I always thought it was Norway, but it's Sweden, huh?
It's done in Stockholm, right?
You know, I hate to be so ignorant, but I always thought maybe somebody can real quick check. Everybody's got a computer, right? Somebody.
Well, if it's in Oslo, then it is Norway. But if it's in Stockholm, then it's in Sweden. They both have parliaments, so. That's
true. I have to confess, I really don't know. I thought I did some research and found out it was Oslo and Norway, but I'm not really sure. Maybe if somebody knows, they can call up right now and set me straight. But yeah, I mean, obviously
straight too, because I thought it was Sweden. I forgot who did what there.
Well, but obviously, if everybody signed a petition, I'd like to see the encouragement to nominate him come from the United States.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Where is it? Norway? Yeah, I'm getting a report here that it might be Norway. Anyhow, go ahead.
Okay. The other thing is like I can jump all over the place on this stuff. What used to be known as the Okalala Aquifer still is, but it's probably about to become a sewer line for the oil. Mm-hmm. Used to stretch all the way down from central Texas all the way up to North Dakota and into Canada. Of course, because of all the heavy agricultural watering they do, and because of the drought and everything else, the aquifer actually is bone dry now in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And parts of New Mexico, even halfway up into Colorado now, they have to dig down whole lot further than where the aquifer normally sits.
Well, part of the problem, too, with the aquifer, which is maybe, is it the largest? I think it may be the largest in the country. One of the problems with it is
it's one of the largest in the world.
It's largest in the world. And one of the problems is that the fracking industry, which is all over these areas, right, uses more water than any other industry or any other corporation or any other group of any other endeavor at all. They use more water to frack for natural gas and for oil than anything else does. And this is one reason why the aquifer is going dry, you know?
Well, yeah, that and the heavy irrigation. I mean, when you're growing corn in the middle of Texas, and basically, that's basically a steppe area where, at the most you can grow wheat or rye.
Right.
Or you're growing tomatoes in central Kansas. I mean, that sucks up an awful lot of water.
So that's something that has nothing to do with the energy and the resource in industries, right? That's just natural the way it's being,
Well, they've actually set it up as a resource, and they figure they're trying to get it sucked up so it lasts about another 100 years at most.
But all of this, all this stuff about, there's
that was decided back in 1950.
All of this seems so astoundingly short-sighted. You know what I mean? The idea of like we're going to get as much as we can, as fast as we can out of it, and then what? I mean, is there any idea of what the future is supposed to be, or that there is a future?
Well, they figured that's somebody else's problem because they'll be dead.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. I mean, is that what it's come to, really? I mean, I thought the whole idea of human beings was to sort of pass on things or to create things for their children, their children's children. The idea that there will be a surviving human race, and you have to pay some attention to that. But I guess that's disappeared entirely. It's now whatever I can get for myself right now, and the hell with everybody else.
Yeah, it's been a concept now for about the past 30 years or so, unfortunately.
Well,
it's growing stronger and stronger every year.
Well, I don't know. I mean, either things change or that's what's going to happen. I mean, either it becomes a sort of
we're going to go by the way of the bacteria in the Petri dish.
Right, the bacteria in the Petri dish. Well, all right. Thanks for calling.
No problem. Take care now.
All right. What do we got? Hey, Mitchell. How you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while.
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I thought global warming got you or something.
No, just life.
Okay.
Anyway, I've been listening to snippets of the show tonight. Unfortunately, I couldn't listen to the whole thing. But first of all, I enjoyed the first hour and particularly the end, your comments on what loneliness and isolation does to a person. And I'm in agreement with you that that is a form of abuse that's pretty unnoticed and unreported in this country.
But at this point, it becomes almost a form of like American cultural abuse, because you're getting these gigantic polls which are showing people saying that they are more lonely than they've ever been in this country.
I was reading a story today about Anthony Weiner in the New York Times magazine, and it was an interview with him, and it was he was talking about like what actually led him to do all these crazy texting and sexting or whatever you want to call it, and he got to therapy, and he really kind of opened up about that. And he says it was like just a need for attention. He talked about his own family and how his brother was hit by a car, and the family really like didn't want to acknowledge that at all, and like how he's always like seeking attention and his need to be constantly loved, and not being able to take the isolation of his wife being on the road all the time, with Hillary Clinton, and it's a very similar type of emotional scenario that you were talking about.
But you see how deep it goes. It's interesting you mentioned all that, or that he mentions all that. And this is how deep it goes. Here's a guy who has got a staff. He's surrounded by a staff, right, of who knows what, half a dozen people. Everywhere he goes, there's a driver, there's an aide, there's a staff everywhere he goes. He's married, but he doesn't ever have to be alone more than most people, right? He's surrounded by people. But if you get that kind of input when you're young, it doesn't make any difference. You could be in the middle of 1,000 people and you will still feel lonely. In fact, part of what she described in her book and part of this report on loneliness said that people who are left alone when they're kids, or who are lonely from experiences as children, if they're abandoned or neglected, they feel lonely even among other people, even when they're in the midst of other people, even if they have a family or maybe they have 6 congressional aides, right? So it makes perfect sense. There's never enough. There's never enough after that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he's talking now because he does still have political ambitions. But I think he I got a sense that he's really being straightforward about this, and I think there's a part of him that's even reluctant about getting back in the arena because he's finally kind of getting in touch with what's been going on with him, and he seems to be happier as a human being.
Well, then he should stay out of politics. In other words, the reason I don't, in case people don't understand, is this guy Anthony Weiner. I don't know if you remember this, but Anthony Weiner was a very loudmouth, provocative, although very intelligent congressman from New York. And he had his sights set on being the mayor of New York. And it was a shoo-in. He was absolutely going to be the mayor of New York. And he was an up-and-coming congressman, making a lot of noise in Congress. As I say, also a brilliant guy. He was renowned for his offensiveness to everybody who worked with him. I mean, he was very intemperate, and and what he did was and he had married this really this woman who was very dynamic, intelligent. This beautiful woman who I think she was an aide to Hillary Clinton. Right,
like one of her top aides, right? In her as a senator and as the Secretary of State.
Okay, and here's Weiner and his I think it was his family had money. He had money, so he's got what a lot of people would say. Wow, look at this! He's got fame, he's got intelligence, he's got money, he's got this wonderful wife, who loves him. And he texted, or a couple of times, he texted photographs of himself, or I don't know how it works, tweeted or texted photographs of himself of himself in underpants. Of his crotch to some woman who basically blew the whistle on him, and that was the end of him, right? And
well, he accidentally when he sent out that tweet to her of him in his underwear, he sent it to all of his Twitter followers, which 40,000 people got.
Well, then you have to think about maybe cocaine or whatever. But if you're going to look at a deeper psychological problem, it's what you brought up. The guy can't get enough attention. There's not enough attention in the whole world. It's like trying to fill a bottomless pit. You know what I mean? And that's the problem. But here, the fact that he wants to be in politics again shows me that he has not been cured. In other words, if he's on the road to recovery from this loneliness problem and this attention addiction, he would get himself a job where he was doing something good for the world, where he didn't have to be constantly in public and be applauded and have everybody love him.
I don't know. I don't get the sense from the article that he's all gung ho into this, and and even his family members have just said exactly what you did. His brother said he was acting like a real douchebag. As far as his behavior.
Douchebag, is that a political term?
No, it's not.
I don't know. Is that a conservative or a liberal term, douchebag?
I think it's bipartisan.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, but I thought that was interesting, and I just want to make one more comment about this Bradley Manning situation. This is something that I think I may have brought up with you once before. But my son is a diplomat in the State Department, and I agree with you. Obama should never have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's something we totally agree on. But as far as Bradley Manning goes, Bradley Manning did an indiscriminate information dump, which really put a lot of things that you would probably support and are worthwhile, in jeopardy. And to give you one small example of that, my son was in Saudi Arabia, and he was working up contacts, to stop human trafficking. And, the people that he had to contact, were talking to him off the record, in private, and, and with the understanding that, that this was, intelligence and, of a kind, state diplomatic intelligence, and that wouldn't be released. When Bradley Manning did this, did the WikiLeaks and all the information came out, a repressive regime like the Saudis are able to look and read these cables. They're not in my son's name. They're everything is signed off by the ambassadors.
Right.
But they're still able to read and determine who these people are exactly, and it puts this guy's life in jeopardy. And this is going on all over the world. This was not a targeted type of information thing. It wasn't even a thing where he was specifically looking for one thing. More or less like Daniel Ellsworth did. With the Pentagon Papers.
Right.
So I would say, I have some serious problems with that, and also the fact that you said that Marty Brodeur is washed up. It's
well, so I didn't say it was washed up. I said that he's on the downhill side. And if I were him, I would hope that for the people who don't know about this, I only got like a minute left, but Marty Brodeur is the most famous hockey goalie in the world. He's probably the best hockey goalie that ever lived. They set every record there is practically, and he was like a hockey genius, an astounding, spectacular hockey goalie. Now he's older. He just really he's still very good, but he doesn't have the reflexes anymore. He's letting in goals he shouldn't let in, and even he knows that, I suppose. But he's sticking around too long. And I'm saying there's a point in all of our lives, in our careers, in our love lives, and something, you have to hope that you would know, and sometimes it just doesn't happen, that when you reach your peak, that's a good time to just lay off, you know?
Well, on behalf of all out the Cocker Canadian goalies, I object.
Okay.
Anyway,
all right. Marty's not washed up. If Marty's not washed up, you're not washed up.
Well, we'll find out about that.
All right.
Anyway, Michael, good to talk to you.
Okay, Mitchell.
Okay.
Yeah, see, this is the radio. Anything you say. All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with a couple of interesting guests. I'm not sure when he's coming, but we have a guy who is, I think he was an ex-Marine from Afghanistan or Iraq or both.